Picture a sun-drenched dock jutting out over the sparkling deep blue waters of the Pacific Ocean.
Okay. Setting the scene. I like it.
Yeah, so the smell of salsa's in the air, the breeze is absolutely perfect,
Yeah.
and standing right at the very edge of the wood is a wildly successful technology executive.
Right.
He's the guy who designed a key foundational component in modern Wi-Fi routers back in his 20s. So he has sold multiple companies, he's young, he is brilliant, and right now on this dock, he is absolutely drunk on his own ego.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's surrounded by a group of his, equally wealthy buddies, and they are laughing, just cackling, really, as they take turns winding up and throwing objects as hard as they can out into the open ocean.
Let me guess, they aren't skipping cheap river rocks.
No, they're absolutely not. They are literally skipping $1,000 solid gold coins across the waves.
That is just, it's insane.
Right. Just to see whose piece of gold goes the furthest before it sinks to the bottom of the Pacific. Like, just for fun.
It's fascinating, though, because that specific action isn't just about wasting money. Psychologically, it's the ultimate display of financial invincibility.
Yeah, exactly.
When someone is skipping gold into the ocean, they are sending a biological signal to everyone around them that their resources are so infinite that the basic rules of scarcity just no longer apply to them.
Right. It's an intoxicating, almost grotesque level of arrogance.
It really is.
And it sets up the most jarring contrast imaginable for this deep dive. Because I want you, the listener, to take that image, that sun-drenched, gold-skipping arrogance, and smash-cut in your mind a quiet, freezing, snowy driveway in rural Vermont.
Complete opposite vibe.
Totally. Standing there is a 92-year-old man named Ronald Reed. He's wearing a worn, faded flannel shirt. His hands are calloused.
Okay.
He spent 25 years of his life fixing cars at a local gas station and another 17 years sweeping floors as a janitor at JCPenney.
A completely ordinary guy.
Right. And right now, his main hobby, his daily routine, is meticulously chopping his own firewood to keep his small house warm.
You look at those two scenes and you assume you are looking at two completely different species of human being, right? Operating in two completely disconnected universes.
Oh, 100%.
One is the master of the modern financial universe, and the other is a ghost in the economic machine.
Which makes the reveal here so staggering. Because that gold-tossing tech genius, a few years after that day on the Pacific dock, he went completely spectacularly bankrupt.
Wow.
Yeah, he lost absolutely everything. His infinite resources just vanished. But the humble janitor, Ronald Reed, the guy sweeping up retail stores, when he died at age 92, he left behind an $8 million fortune.
It breaks the brain to hear that. $8 million quietly accumulated by a man who fixed alternators and swept up dust.
It's wild. He left $2 million to his stepkids and more than $6 million to his local hospital and library.
That is incredible.
And when the news broke, his friends and neighbors were entirely baffled. They searched his background. There was no secret lottery win. There was no massive inheritance from a distant relative.
It was just him, just his own habits.
Exactly. Which perfectly frames the massive counterintuitive puzzle we are sitting down to solve today.
I am so ready for this.
Welcome to part 1 of our epic 4-part deep dive mini-series into the psychology of money by Morgan Housel. And if you are joining us right now, I really need to set the rules of engagement for this entire mini-series right at the top.
Yeah, we have to lay the ground rules.
Because if you clicked play on this deep dive looking for complicated math, if you want us to read off Excel spreadsheets, if you are searching for Greek letter financial jargon or complex algorithmic trading models,
you are in the wrong place.
You are so in the wrong place. We are throwing the calculators and the spreadsheets entirely out the window.
Because a spreadsheet cannot possibly explain why the brilliant tech genius ended up broke and the janitor became a multimillionaire.
Right.
The math of finance is actually quite simple. It's the human element that introduces the chaos.
Exactly. We are exploring the messy, emotional, deeply human, entirely irrational engine that actually drives wealth. Think of this deep dive as a thrilling psychological heist.
Ooh, I love that frame.
We are hacking into the human brain to figure out why the absolute smartest people on planet Earth routinely do the dumbest things imaginable with their wallets, and why ordinary, everyday people can quietly build absolute empires.
It's a dopaminergic sprint through human nature. And to do this properly, we really have to look under the hood of how our brains actually process risk, reward, and survival.
And we are moving at high velocity today. In this first session, we are tearing through the foundational concepts of this framework. We're going to decode why no one, not even the guy throwing gold into the ocean, is actually crazy with money.
Right.
We are going to unmask the invisible, silent doppelgangers of luck and risk that dictate your life. We'll explore the intoxicating, sometimes lethal poison of never enough.
That part is so crucial.
We'll break down the logic-defying, brain-melting magic of compounding. And finally, we will expose the massive, counterintuitive difference between getting wealthy and staying wealthy.
The foundational premise you have to accept, like before we take another step, is this. Financial success is not a hard science.
No.
It is not physics. It's not chemistry. It's a soft skill. It is deeply behavioral. And how you behave in a moment of panic or euphoria matters infinitely more than what you technically know.
Let's start right there with his no one is crazy principle. Because the contrast between Ronald Reed, the janitor, and the guys at the top of the financial food chain is the perfect entry point.
Oh, absolutely.
The source material contrasts Reed with a guy named Richard Fuscone. Now, Fuscone is essentially the polar opposite of the janitor. He is Harvard-educated.
The elite of the elite.
He has an MBA from an elite institution. He was a wildly successful executive at Merrill Lynch. The former CEO of Merrill publicly praised his business savvy and his sound judgment.
Sounds like the perfect resume.
Right, he was plastered on 40 under 40 lists in business magazines. He was so incredibly successful that he actually retired in his 40s to become a full-time philanthropist.
So on paper, if you feed Richard Fuscone's resume into an algorithm, he is the apex predator of the financial world.
Yeah.
He possesses all the formal training, he has access to the highest level of market data, and he has a network of the most powerful people on Wall Street.
But the behavioral engine takes over. In the mid-2000s, Fuscone decides to borrow heavily to expand a mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Oh, boy.
And we are not talking about a nice addition to a kitchen. This is an 18,000 square foot compound. We're talking 11 bathrooms, 2 private elevators, 2 pools, 7 garages.
That is just, why do you need 2 elevators?
I have no idea. And it costs $90,000 a single month just in basic maintenance.
90 grand a month, just to keep the lights on and the pools clean.
Yeah, and then the 2008 financial crisis hits. The credit markets freeze. And Fuscone's supposedly invincible empire turns to absolute dust.
That's so fast, too.
He goes bankrupt. He actually stands before a bankruptcy judge and declares he has 0 income. His Palm Beach vacation house gets foreclosed on, and then the Greenwich mansion, the one with the 2 elevators and the see-through covering over the indoor pool, is sold at a foreclosure auction for 75% less than what he thought it was worth.
To understand the mechanics of his failure, you have to look at the concept of illiquid assets.
Right. Unpack that for us.
When the 2008 crisis hit, Fuscone didn't just lose his income, he was trapped by his wealth. An 18,000 square foot mansion is an incredibly illiquid asset. You cannot turn it into cash overnight.
No, you definitely can't.
When the banks called in his debts, he couldn't just slice off a bathroom and sell it to pay his mortgage. He was suffocating under $90,000 a month of maintenance while holding an asset nobody in a financial crisis wanted to buy.
It's a terrifying position to be in. And here's the kicker. 5 months before Ronald Reed, the janitor, passed away and left his $8 million fortune to charity, Richard Fuscone, the Harvard executive, was completely financially ruined.
The timing is just poetic.
Ronald was patient. Richard was greedy and heavily leveraged. And that massive, gaping behavioral difference completely eclipsed the canyon of education and experience between them.
And this leads to an observation that completely reframes how we should view the entire concept of money. Finance is the only major industry, the only major field of human endeavor where this dynamic is even possible.
Wait, really? The only field? What about, like, technology or engineering?
Think about the mechanics of other professions. A janitor with 0 formal medical training could never, under any circumstances, walk into an operating room, pick up a scalpel, and perform a quadruple bypass surgery better than a Harvard-trained cardiovascular surgeon.
Right.
It is a biological and physical impossibility. A gas station attendant is never going to sit down at a drafting table and design a 200-story skyscraper better than a top-tier structural architect.
That would be a disaster.
Exactly. You will never read a news story about a guy who sweeps floors in his spare time, casually outperforming the world's top nuclear physicists at stabilizing a reactor core.
Right, because those fields are bound by these immovable laws of physics, biology, and structural mechanics. You either possess the deeply technical, specialized knowledge required to execute the task, or you do not. There is no faking it.
Exactly. But investing, Building wealth, the undeniable reality that Ronald Read and Richard Fuscone can exist in the exact same universe, participating in the exact same stock market, and the janitor can utterly destroy the Harvard executive.
It's wild.
It proves conclusively that money is not a hard science. It is an emotional landscape. It is governed entirely by ego, by dopamine, by fear, and by human psychology.
But that brings up a massive contradiction for me. If it is all psychology, if it's all behavioral, why do people do such wild, seemingly irrational things with their money?
Because of how they see the world.
Right, but the premise is that no one is crazy. And I'm sorry, skipping $1,000 solid gold coins into the Pacific Ocean or paying 90 grand a month to maintain a house you don't even need looks fundamentally, undeniably crazy to anyone looking at it.
It looks crazy from your vantage point. But human beings don't operate on a shared universal reality. We operate entirely on the microscopic sliver of reality we have personally experienced.
The source material has this incredible visual for this that we really want to unpack. Imagine a massive, sprawling, 3D topographical map of a mountain range.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Picture the Alps or the Himalayas, but rendered in perfect miniature 3D. Every single human being on Earth is standing on a different isolated peak of this vast mountain range.
Right.
When you look out from your specific peak, you only see the landscape as it appears from your coordinates. You might see a lush green valley to your left, a sheer, terrifying cliff to your right, and maybe a dense, blinding fog rolling in from the north.
You're completely boxed in by your own perspective.
Exactly. You are physically incapable of seeing what the person standing on a peak 10 miles away is looking at. Their reality might be a sunlit plateau.
It is the perfect analogy for financial psychology. Your personal lived experience with money makes up maybe 0.0000001% of what has actually happened in the global economic history of the world.
It's basically nothing.
Nothing. But that tiny, almost statistically irrelevant sliver of experience dictates roughly 80% of how you deeply, viscerally believe the entire world works.
So what seems mathematically or logically insane to me, standing in my fog on my peak, makes perfect, rational, survival-based sense to you standing on your sunlit plateau.
Precisely. Let's look at how generational trauma actively rewires the brain. The era you happen to be born into physically shapes your neurobiology regarding risk and reward.
Oh, this is fascinating.
Imagine a stockbroker who was 25 years old in 1929. They watched the stock market entirely collapse. They watched banks literally lock their doors, wiping out families' entire life savings in an afternoon.
In literally hours.
Yeah, that isn't just a bad day at the office. That is a profound neurological trauma. It triggers the amygdala. It floods the body with cortisol.
Their entire peak on that topographical map is shaped by absolute scarcity, terror, and the very real threat of starvation.
The historian Frederick Lewis Allen wrote about how the Great Depression marked millions of Americans inwardly. It changed their biological relationship to risk forever.
Wow.
John F. Kennedy, who came from massive insulated wealth, famously admitted he had absolutely no firsthand knowledge of the Depression until he read about it in a book while attending Harvard.
He was standing on a totally different mountain peak.
Entirely different mountain. So you take that Depression-era survivor whose brain is hardwired to believe the financial system is a fragile house of cards, and you put them in a room with a 24-year-old tech worker who entered the job market in the late 1990s.
Right, during the absolute height of the dot-com boom.
Exactly. That tech worker's peak is shaped by explosive growth, unprecedented euphoria, companies doubling in value overnight, and the deeply ingrained belief that stocks only ever go up.
So if you ask those two individuals to sit down and agree on how to invest $10,000, they won't just disagree. They will look at each other like they are insane.
The Depression survivor wants to bury it in gold in the backyard.
And the tech worker wants to leverage it into a risky startup.
And neither of them is inherently crazy. They're simply running their decision-making algorithms on entirely different sets of historical data.
That makes so much sense.
The Australian citizen who hasn't experienced a severe economic recession in 30 uninterrupted years views the concept of risk fundamentally differently than an American who graduated college straight into the teeth of the 2008 financial crisis.
This empathy framework actually forces us to look at one of the most highly criticized financial behaviors in the world, the lottery.
Oh, this is a great example.
Right. From a purely mathematical, analytical, spreadsheet warrior perspective, buying lottery tickets when you were living at or below the poverty line is insane. It is objectively the worst possible financial decision you can make. The mathematical odds of winning are astronomically stacked against you.
The spreadsheet screams in bright red letters like, "Do not execute this transaction. The expected value is deeply negative."
Exactly. But if we actually use the topographical map, if we climb down off our comfortable middle-class peak and hike up onto the peak of someone living in deep poverty, the landscape changes entirely.
The math stops mattering and the psychology takes over.
Yep.
When you look closely at the daily reality of that peak, you see exhaustion. If you are struggling to pay your baseline rent, if you have zero emergency savings, if your car breaking down means you lose your job.
The traditional, mathematically sound paths to wealth feel completely inaccessible.
Telling that person to put their spare $3 into a low-cost index fund and wait 40 years feels like an insult. The doors to college, to real estate investment, to the stock market all feel locked behind a giant, insurmountable wall.
So when they walk into a gas station and put $3 on the counter for a Powerball ticket, they aren't making a mathematical calculation. They aren't confused about the odds.
No, they are purchasing a feeling. They are buying the only available sliver of hope that they could possibly escape their reality.
Wow.
For the 3 days between buying that ticket and the drawing, they get to dream. They get to hold in their hand a physical piece of paper that represents the idea that they, too, could buy the things that wealthy people take entirely for granted.
You and I might look at the spreadsheet and say it's a terrible strategy, but when you view it through the lens of psychological survival, you suddenly understand the mechanism of why they do it. What looks crazy is actually just a desperate, very human search for agency in a system where they feel they have none.
It's all about empathy.
But wait, if finance is entirely behavioral, if it's all about empathy and trauma and neurobiology and moving past our mountain peaks, why on earth is it overwhelmingly taught in our institutions like a hard science?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, a decade ago, financial engineering was literally the most popular major in Princeton's entire School of Engineering. We are churning out tens of thousands of spreadsheet warriors every year. Why are we doing that if spreadsheets don't actually make us better at surviving this psychological game of money?
That is the core contradiction of modern society, and the answer is surprisingly simple but jarring. Modern personal finance is an absolute infant.
An infant?
We treat it like physics, with complex equations and rigid models, because human beings crave the comfort of laws and rules. We want to believe there is a formula that guarantees our safety, but the reality is the concepts we rely on today are historically brand new.
What do you mean new? Humans have been trading things forever. King Eliot of Lydia was minting physical currency in 600 BC. The concept of money is ancient.
Currency as a medium of exchange is ancient, but the system of modern personal finance, the idea of a 30-year retirement funded by personal investments, that is a blip on the radar of human history.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Let's look at the mechanisms. The 401k, the primary vehicle most Americans rely on to survive in their old age, didn't even exist until 1978.
Really? 1978?
Yes. The Roth IRA, another foundational pillar of personal finance, was born in 1998.
1998. The Roth IRA is younger than the DVD player.
Exactly. The foundational idea that the average, everyday person is personally responsible for navigating a highly volatile global stock market in order to fund a multi-decade retirement is a massive, unprecedented social experiment. It is barely a single generation old.
That is wild to think about.
Before World War II, the concept of retirement essentially didn't exist for the working class. You worked until your body physically gave out, and then you passed away shortly after. Retirement was an exclusive luxury reserved for the ultra-elite.
And now, it is a baseline mass expectation.
We are all essentially toddlers, wandering around a massive, sparking, highly complex, newly invented factory floor, trying to figure out what all these buttons and levers do.
Like pushing random buttons and hoping we don't blow up our retirement?
Yeah. Right. We haven't had millennia of collective genetic trial and error to figure out how to manage a diversified portfolio the way we have with agriculture or building shelters or even basic plumbing.
So we cling to the math and the spreadsheets as a coping mechanism. We are terrified of the emotional weight of this newly invented high-stakes system, so we build complex models to make ourselves feel like we are in control.
And that illusion of control is exactly why the Harvard MBA goes bankrupt, trying to mathematically optimize his debt during a housing crash, while the janitor slowly and quietly builds a fortune just by consistently saving and refusing to panic.
The janitor mastered the psychology. The executive mastered a spreadsheet that didn't account for human panic.
Yes.
If we accept that no one is crazy and that we are all just trying to navigate this incredibly new game using the tiny, distorted lenses of our own topographical peaks. It means we have to give ourselves and others a massive amount of grace.
Which perfectly dismantles the next massive illusion we all fall for when we evaluate success and failure. The myth of total agency and the invisible doppelgangers of luck and risk.
Let's dive deep into Chapter 2, Luck and Risk. The source material calls them siblings. They are two sides of the exact same coin.
They are completely intertwined.
And this is where we have to take a sledgehammer to the myth of the self-made, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, billionaire.
It's a deeply uncomfortable truth for a lot of people to swallow because human beings are narratively driven creatures. We love a good hero story.
We really do.
We want to desperately believe that 100% of our outcomes are dictated by 100% of our conscious efforts. If I work hard, I win. If I am lazy, I lose. It's clean, it's fair.
But the world is infinitely too complex for that clean narrative to be true. You have one single node in a chaotic, globally connected network of 7 billion other people, with infinite moving parts, weather systems, pandemics, and macroeconomic shifts all colliding at once.
The accidental, totally random impact of actions completely outside of your control can be vastly more consequential to your life than the actions you consciously decide to take.
Let's make this visceral. Let's talk about the ultimate modern hero story, Bill Gates. We all know the cultural narrative. He's the boy genius. He works harder than anyone else. He has unmatched vision. He builds Microsoft from a garage and conquers the technological world. Total, pure meritocracy.
That is the sanitized spreadsheet version of the story. It ignores the invisible wind at his back. When you dig into the psychological and historical reality of his trajectory, it involves a massive, undeniable, 1-in-a-million stroke of pure luck.
Picture the environment. It is Seattle, 1968. Bill Gates is just a kid in the 8th grade. He attends a private institution called Lakeside School.
Right.
Now, you have to understand the context of 1968. Computers were not things you had on a desk. They were massive, room-sized mainframes that cost millions of dollars and required specialized technicians just to turn on.
You couldn't just buy a laptop at Best Buy.
No. The vast majority of university graduate students studying computer science didn't even have physical access to a computer. They used punch cards. But Lakeside had a visionary math teacher named Bill Dougal.
And Dougal believed book learning wasn't enough. He wanted real-world experience.
So he convinced the Mothers Club to use the proceeds from a rummage sale to lease a teletype Model 33 computer terminal for the high school students to use.
Let's pause and appreciate the sheer statistical improbability of that moment. A high school with a live, sparking, ticking computer terminal in 1968 was a complete anomaly.
It really was.
You had better odds of being struck by lightning than being a teenager with unlimited access to a computer in that year.
Gates himself has explicitly stated that if there had been no Lakeside School, there would have been no Microsoft. Period. He had unrestricted access to a world-changing technology when almost no one else his age on the entire planet did.
He got to log thousands of hours of coding practice before most people even knew what a computer screen looked like. That is the ultimate tailwind of luck.
But here is where the story pivots and where it gets incredibly dark. Because to understand luck, you have to look at its shadow. You have to look at risk.
And Lakeside School provides the perfect, tragic laboratory to observe the sibling of luck.
At Lakeside, Bill Gates had a best friend named Kent Evans.
Kent Evans was widely considered to be just as brilliant as Bill Gates.
Yeah.
They were absolute partners in crime. They shared the exact same relentless drive, the same obsessive fascination with the teletype terminal.
Gates remembers Kent carrying around a giant bulky briefcase full of gadgets and schematics. They were actively planning their entire futures together. They were going to conquer the emerging tech world side by side.
They had the same potential.
Kent Evans had the exact same raw skills, the exact same intellect, and the exact same access to that lucky Lakeside computer.
But Kent Evans never got to be a founder of Microsoft. Before he even graduated high school, Kent died in a tragic mountaineering accident.
The statistical odds of being killed on a mountain while in high school are roughly 1 in a million. Bill Gates experienced a 1 in a million stroke of luck by ending up at Lakeside. Kent Evans experienced a 1 in a million stroke of extreme risk.
It is the exact same mathematical force, the exact same magnitude of statistical improbability, just working in the exact opposite direction.
It is a devastating reality, but it is the ultimate, undeniable proof that outcomes in life are not perfectly, cleanly correlated with effort or intellect. Risk is simply what happens when you end up on the unfortunate downside tail of the equation of chance.
It really humbles you to think about it.
I hear this, and my brain starts to hit a wall. If luck and risk are truly running the show behind the scenes, if they are these invisible, omnipotent puppet masters pulling the strings, doesn't that induce complete financial nihilism?
I get why you'd think that.
If it's all just a coin flip of the universe, why do we bother doing anything? Are we just helpless leaves blowing in a macroeconomic hurricane? Why even try to study success or read books about finance?
That is the natural initial reaction when people realize how much chance dictates their lives. But it is entirely the wrong takeaway. The framework isn't suggesting that effort, grit, and intelligence are meaningless. Of course they matter.
Right.
What the author is aggressively warning us against is the profound danger of hero worship and hindsight bias.
Unpack hindsight bias for me in this context.
When we look at wildly successful billionaires, our brains crave a neat explanation. So we attribute 100% of their success to their brilliance, their specific morning routine, or their ruthless negotiation tactics, completely erasing the invisible hand of luck from the narrative.
And conversely, when we look at people who fail, who go bankrupt, we aggressively attribute it entirely to their laziness, their lack of foresight, or their bad decisions, completely ignoring the invisible, crushing hand of risk.
Exactly. This cognitive bias makes it incredibly dangerous to try and blindly copy the behaviors of extreme outliers.
Because you might be copying the exact behaviors that only work because of a lucky tailwind. Let's look at the titans of industry for an example of this danger. Cornelius Vanderbilt and John D. Rockefeller.
Oh, perfect example.
These are the guys we build statues of. Vanderbilt built this massive continent-spanning railroad empire. And to do it, he routinely agreed to transactions and orchestrated takeovers. They were completely, blatantly illegal.
Just completely ignored the law.
He has this famous quote where he basically laughs and says, "What do I care about the law? He and I got the power."
He fundamentally believed he was above the legal structure of the country, and he operated his businesses accordingly. And how does history remember him? As a cunning, bold, visionary business genius.
Yeah.
Rockefeller was the same. He systematically circumvented the law to build Standard Oil. A sitting judge literally called his corporate practices no better than a common thief. Yet MBA programs across the world write entire courses studying his brilliant, aggressive market strategies.
But if we flash forward to the year 2001, and an executive at Enron does the exact same thing if they aggressively flaunt the law, hide debt, and manipulate markets to build their empire, we don't call them visionaries.
No, not all.
We call them reckless, disgraced criminals, we put them in handcuffs, and we throw them in federal prison for a decade.
Precisely. The line between cunning, bold, visionary genius and reckless, disgraced criminal facing 20 years is often a millimeter thick. And crucially, that line is entirely invisible until after the fact.
Vanderbilt got incredibly lucky that he operated in an era and a context where he avoided the full crushing arm of the law. He survived his own audacity. The Enron executives found themselves on the devastating side of risk.
So if Vanderbilt's coin had happened to land tails, if a prosecutor had successfully taken him down, the history books would call him a criminal idiot. We would be taught to avoid his strategies at all costs. But because it landed heads, he's a genius, and we study his methods. That is genuinely terrifying.
It is terrifying, which answers your fear about nihilism. The actionable takeaway from understanding luck and risk isn't to give up on trying. The takeaway is to aggressively stop obsessing over extreme outliers.
Do not try to perfectly emulate the exact tactics of the guy who made $1 billion shorting a specific tech stock, because you cannot replicate his luck, and you might not physically or financially survive his level of risk.
So what are we actually supposed to study?
We look for broad, median, unsexy patterns. Instead of studying the one guy who hit the lottery on a cryptocurrency swing, which is heavily dictated by luck, study the millions of quiet people who built wealth by saving 15% of their income into index funds consistently over 30 years.
Broad patterns are actionable. They smooth out the extreme spikes of luck and risk. Extreme outliers are just entertaining stories. They are terrible financial roadmaps.
And the source material points out a deeply personal psychological takeaway here that I love. Forgiveness.
Forgiveness, how so?
If we truly deeply respect the destructive power of risk, we have to learn to forgive ourselves for our financial failures. Sometimes you make a genuinely good, mathematically sound decision that has an 80% chance of success, and you just happen to land in the unfortunate 20% tail end of the probability curve.
The market crashes unexpectedly. A pandemic hits, You didn't necessarily screw up the decision, you just experienced risk.
It separates your self-worth from your net worth. And similarly, if we respect the invisible wind of luck, we must remain profoundly humble in our successes. When your investments are skyrocketing, when your business is booming, you have to realize it's not quite as purely meritocratic as your ego wants to believe. You aren't invincible. The wind could change direction tomorrow.
That is such a powerful shift in mindset. It completely defangs the paralyzing anxiety of failure and simultaneously pops the dangerous balloon of arrogance, which perfectly sets up the next psychological trap.
Oh, this is a big one.
Because if there's one thing that absolutely destroys people who get high on their own supply of luck, it is the relentless, exhausting treadmill of never enough.
We are entering the territory of the disease of more, Chapter 3.
I want to frame this with one of my favorite literary anecdotes from the book. It's this legendary, almost mythic interaction that happened at a party on Shelter Island in New York.
Okay, set the scene for us.
The party is being hosted by this staggeringly wealthy billionaire hedge fund manager. And attending this party, mingling with Wall Street elite, are two famous authors, Kurt Vonnegut, the guy who wrote Slaughterhouse-Five, and Joseph Heller, the author of the iconic novel Catch-22.
You have these two incredibly sharp, observant literary giants dropped into the middle of a billionaire's playground. The contrast is perfect.
Right. So they are looking around at the sheer opulence, and Vonnegut turns to Heller. He leans out that the billionaire host of the party, this hedge fund manager, makes more money in a single day of trading than Heller has earned from the entire multi-decade history of his wildly popular novel Catch-22.
It's a staggering, almost depressing comparison for a writer to hear.
But Heller doesn't miss a beat. He responds with what I consider the most powerful, profound flex I've ever heard. He looks at Vonnegut and says, yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough.
Enough. It is the absolute rarest commodity in the world of finance.
It really is. And the lack of that commodity, the absolute inability to feel enough, leads directly to the dark side of ambition. To explore the mechanics of this, we have to look at Rajat Gupta.
Let's unpack this guy's life, because his story is the ultimate, terrifying cautionary tale of what happens when the goalpost never stops moving.
Rajat Gupta's life actually started out with a massive deficit of luck. He was born in Kolkata, India, and he was tragically orphaned as a teenager. He had nothing handed to him.
But he was undeniably brilliant. He hustled relentlessly, he secured an elite education, and he began climbing the corporate ladder. And he didn't just climb it, he conquered it.
He reached the absolute highest peaks of global corporate power. He became the CEO of McKinsey & Company, one of the most prestigious consulting firms on earth. He sat on the board of directors for Goldman Sachs and Procter & Gamble. He was deeply embedded in the philanthropic world. His personal net worth was estimated to be $100 million.
Let that sink in. $100 million. He had unequivocally won the game of capitalism. He possessed unimaginable wealth, international prestige, total power, and complete freedom. He could do whatever he wanted, wherever he wanted, for the rest of his life and his children's lives and their children's lives.
But the psychological tragedy is that he didn't have enough. His brain was wired to always look at the rung above him. In 2008, right in the terrifying teeth of the global financial crisis, Gupta is sitting on a highly confidential Goldman Sachs board of directors call.
This is where it all goes wrong.
During this call, the board is informed that Warren Buffett is about to inject a massive $5 billion investment into Goldman Sachs to help save the bank from the crisis. This is incredibly valuable, highly classified, market-moving information.
The second the public finds out Buffett is backing Goldman, the stock is going to rocket upwards.
Exactly. And 16 seconds, literally 16 seconds after hanging up that confidential board call, Gupta picks up the phone and calls a billionaire hedge fund manager named Rajaratnam.
Unbelievable.
Rajaratnam immediately uses this secret information to buy a massive, leveraged amount of Goldman stock before the market closes. When the Buffett deal is publicly announced shortly after, the stock soars just as expected. Rajaratnam makes a quick, easy $1 million in profit.
It is the textbook definition of insider trading. It is blatantly illegal. And for what? For a relatively tiny payout compared to Gupta's existing $100 million net worth. And of course, the SEC was watching. He got caught. He was convicted. He went to federal prison. His impeccable reputation, his lifelong legacy, his total freedom, all of it was completely, irrevocably destroyed in 16 seconds.
And he's not an isolated incident. Look at Bernie Madoff. Madoff was incredibly, legitimately wealthy from his market-making brokerage business long before he ever decided to start his fraudulent Ponzi scheme.
This is where we have to ask the critical psychological question, why? What is the mechanism driving this self-destruction?
Yeah, why did they do it?
If a person living in deep poverty steals a loaf of bread to survive, we can immediately understand the mechanism. It's biological survival. But Gupta and Madoff risked what they already had and deeply needed, which was their freedom and reputation, in order to get a marginal amount of extra money that they absolutely didn't have and didn't need. From a rational standpoint, it defies all logic.
It is the brutal mechanics of the social comparison trap. It is like an infinitely ascending ladder, and your brain is evolutionarily wired to only ever look up at the next rung. Let's translate this to everyday life, because most people listening to this aren't sitting on the board of Goldman Sachs.
To understand the mechanism, think about a rookie baseball player who gets called up to the major leagues and signs his first contract for $500,000 a year. By any global, historical, or median standard, he is incredibly rich. He has won the absolute lottery of life. His financial worries should be entirely over.
But he doesn't live in a vacuum. He walks into the major league locker room, and he sits down at his locker right next to Mike Trout, who is making $36 million a year.
Suddenly, the rookie's brain recalibrates. He doesn't feel rich anymore. He feels completely broke. He feels inadequate. His $500,000 feels like a rounding error.
So the rookie gets on the treadmill. He trains harder. He sets his sights on that $36 million rung. But what happens to Mike Trout? Trout is at the pinnacle of his sport.
But Trout picks up the Wall Street Journal and reads that a top hedge fund manager made $340 million in a single year, largely just by moving numbers around on a screen. Trout, despite his generational wealth, suddenly feels like a peasant in comparison.
And the hedge fund manager, he compares his $300 million to the top 5 macro managers making $700 million.
Yeah.
And they compare themselves to Warren Buffett, whose net worth fluctuates by billions of dollars in a single afternoon. And Buffett looks at Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos.
The ceiling of social comparison is so staggeringly high that virtually no human being will ever actually hit it. The ladder never ends. If you willingly get on that treadmill, if you let your baseline of satisfaction continually reset to the person above you, the only way to mathematically win is to choose not to fight to begin with. You have to consciously, deliberately step off the ladder and accept that you have enough.
Okay, my brain is hitting another wall here. I hear this concept of stepping off the ladder, and a part of me aggressively rebels against it. Isn't this insatiable hunger, this constant, relentless moving of the goalpost, the exact engine that fuels human progress?
That's the counter-argument, yeah.
If everyone in history just sat back in their caves and said, you know what, I have a nice dry spot and enough berries for the winter, I'm good, wouldn't technological and social innovation just completely crash? If Elon Musk had decided he had enough money after selling PayPal, we wouldn't have reusable SpaceX rockets or the mass adoption of electric vehicles.
Yeah.
How do we draw the line between a healthy society-driving ambition and the toxic greed that destroyed Rajat Gupta?
It's the ultimate philosophical and financial dilemma. But understanding the author's definition of enough is crucial here. Having enough is not a synonym for conservatism. It's not an excuse for being lazy, or leaving your potential on the table, or refusing to build great things. The definition is very specific. Enough is the profound realization that an insatiable appetite will eventually, inevitably, push you to the point of profound regret.
To the point of regret, the tipping point where the risk outweighs the reward.
Exactly. The absolute hardest financial skill to master is getting the internal goalpost to stop moving. If your expectations rise at the exact same speed or faster than your results, you will biologically always feel like you are failing no matter how much you achieve. One step forward in wealth pushes the psychological goalpost 2 steps ahead.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. To chase that moving target, you are forced to take greater and greater amounts of risk just to feel the exact same baseline level of dopamine and satisfaction.
It functions exactly like a chemical addiction.
Yeah.
You build a tolerance. You need a massively higher dose of risk and reward just to feel normal.
And eventually, if you don't know your limit, you overdose. You take a massive, uncalculated risk that completely wipes you out. The framework reminds us that there are deeply priceless assets that are never worth risking, regardless of the potential financial payout. Your reputation, your physical freedom, your family and friends, being genuinely loved and respected by the people you want to love you, your baseline peace of mind and happiness.
Rajat Gupta risked all of those priceless, irreplaceable assets for a marginal, incremental increase in a bank account that he couldn't even physically spend in his lifetime.
And he lost them all. That is the devastating reality of not knowing you're enough.
Absolutely devastating.
So we've hacked the mindset. We understand the danger of the comparison ladder and the invisible forces of luck and risk. Now, let's transition into the actual mathematical mechanism of how wealth is truly built. We need to talk about the mind-bending, logic-defying reality of compounding, Chapter 4.
Let's do it.
And to explain this, I want to start with another massive cinematic metaphor. Let's talk about the geological mechanics of ice ages.
It is arguably the most visceral, perfect science lesson we can apply to the concept of financial growth. When we think about an ice age, our brains default to dramatic Hollywood-style imagery. We imagine some extreme cataclysmic event, a massive asteroid hitting the Earth, kicking up a dust cloud, causing a sudden, violent global freeze that encases the world in ice overnight.
Like a disaster movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But geologically speaking, that is not how it works at all.
Not even close. Ice ages are not born from sudden, violent extremes. They are caused by something incredibly, almost boringly mundane, a slightly cooler summer.
Yes, a summer that just isn't quite warm enough to melt all the accumulated snow from the previous winter. So a tiny, thin, almost unnoticeable layer of snow survives the summer heat. Then, the next winter, more snow falls on top of it.
And here is where the mechanism of compounding kicks in. Because there's already a base layer of highly reflective white snow on the ground, it bounces the sun's rays back into the atmosphere. It's called the albedo effect.
Okay.
This makes the local environment slightly cooler, making it exponentially easier for even more snow to survive the next summer. It's a tiny, incremental, relentless feedback loop.
And over tens of thousands of years, that tiny layer of leftover snow compounds upon itself. It builds and builds and builds until it creates a continent-spanning sheet of solid ice, miles thick, with enough gravitational force and sheer weight to literally carve the valleys of the Alps and crush the Himalayas out of solid bedrock.
The lesson is profound. You do not need tremendous violent force to create a tremendous earth-shaping result. You just need relentless, uninterrupted compounding.
Small, relentless growth creates a force that carves mountains, which brings us directly to the ultimate human equivalent of a compounding glacier, Warren Buffett.
He is the quintessential living embodiment of financial compounding.
We have to shatter the popular illusions surrounding him. There are literally thousands of books written about Warren Buffett, dissecting his every move, trying to decode his magical stock-picking wizardry. Everyone wants to know his secret algorithm for evaluating a business.
But they are entirely missing the most mind-blowing central mathematical fact of his entire career.
Walk us through the math.
At the time this source material was written, Warren Buffett's personal net worth was roughly $84.5 billion. Out of that staggeringly massive $84.5 billion fortune, $81.5 billion of it came after his mid-60s. He made $81.5 billion after he qualified for standard Social Security.
You really have to pause and let that marinate. Over 96% of his total life's wealth was accumulated in the years after the age when most normal human beings retire.
His true secret isn't just that he is a highly skilled investor with a good eye for businesses. His ultimate secret, the engine of his wealth, is time. He started seriously investing when he was just 10 years old.
10 years old. He has been letting that thin layer of snow accumulate and reflect sunlight for 3/4 of a century without interrupting it.
Let's do a thought experiment to prove exactly how insane the math of time really is. Let's look at an alternate reality Warren Buffett.
Okay, I love alternate realities.
Let's say he lived a totally normal median life. He spends his teens and his 20s traveling, finding himself, maybe playing the guitar and figuring out his career. He doesn't start seriously investing his money until he is 30 years old, and he starts with a respectable nest egg of $25,000.
Seems reasonable.
Now, in this alternate reality, he still possesses his absolute genius intellect. He still earns his historic market-crushing 22% annual returns, but like a normal person who gets tired after a long career, he decides to retire at age 60 to go play golf and hang out with his grandkids.
Okay, so he invests consistently from age 30 to age 60. 3 full decades of compounding at a genius-level return rate.
Yeah.
A very respectable, highly successful career.
What would his net worth be today in that scenario? It wouldn't be $84.5 billion. It would be $11.9 million.
$11.9 million. That is mathematically 99.9% less than his actual real-world net worth.
99.9% less. Our brains physically cannot handle the reality of that math. His technical skill is evaluating businesses, but his actual superpower is time. If he had stayed up to compounding at 60, no one would know his name, there would be no books written about him. He'd just be a moderately wealthy guy playing golf at the local country club.
To drive this home even further, let's contrast Buffett with another legend of the financial world, Jim Simons.
Mm.
Simons is the famously reclusive head of Renaissance Technologies, which is a highly secretive quantitative hedge fund.
By absolutely every mathematical measure of pure, unadulterated investing skill, Simons is a vastly, almost incomprehensibly superior investor to Warren Buffett. Simons has achieved a ridiculous, logic-defying 66% annual return since 1988. 66%.
That is triple Buffett's famous 22% return. No one else on the planet even comes close to what Simons has done.
But wait, if his returns are literally triple what Buffett earns, why isn't Jim Simons the richest man in the history of the world?
Because of the timeline. Simons didn't find his true investment stride and start putting up those massive numbers until he was 50 years old. He had less than half as many years as Buffett to let his money compound.
As a result, Simons' net worth is roughly $21 billion. He is, and this sounds entirely absurd to say out loud, 75% less rich than Warren Buffett, despite being 3 times better at the actual skill of investing.
The book calculates that if Simons had started investing at age 10 exactly like Buffett did, and he somehow maintained that impossible 66% annual return, his net worth would be $63 quintillion. Ridiculous, universe-breaking numbers.
It conclusively proves that while high returns are great, relentless, uninterrupted compounding over extreme lengths of time is the dominant defining force of wealth creation.
Okay, here is where my brain starts short-circuiting again. And I know people listening are feeling this exact same frustration. Our neurobiology is completely, fundamentally broken when it comes to understanding exponential math. If you ask me right now what 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 is, I don't even have to think. It's 32. Linear thinking is evolutionarily easy for us. We understand a straight line.
Right.
But if you ask me what 8 times 8 times 8 times 8 is, my brain just produces static. I have no intuitive feel for that number.
Exactly. We are evolutionarily wired as hunters and gatherers. We understand linear concepts. If I walk for 1 hour, I cover 3 miles. If I walk for 2 hours, I cover 6. We are not wired to instinctively grasp exponential curves where the growth suddenly goes vertical.
So because we can't naturally intuit the power of compounding, we ignore it. We look for shortcuts. And we live in a highly stimulated ADHD, dopamine-driven modern culture. We want the crypto coin that is going to rocket up 1,000% by tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
We want the viral startup exit. We desperately want instant gratification.
We want the fast lane.
Are you telling me that the ultimate, undefeated, historically proven financial strategy is literally just shutting up and waiting? Because that sounds like absolute agonizing torture.
It is agonizing. It goes against every instinct we have to do something when we want a result. The author actually makes a brilliant joke about this. He says that instead of shelves full of complex books on intricate trading strategies and macroeconomic timing, the most powerful, effective finance book in the world should just be one single page with a long-term chart of economic growth, and the title of the book should be Shut Up and Wait.
Shut up and wait. It's brilliant.
Sounds boring, but the profound lesson for the listener is this. We devote all of our mental energy desperately trying to find the absolute highest possible returns we want, the home runs. But the highest returns are almost always one-off hits. They cannot be reliably repeated, and they almost always involve a massive amount of hidden risk that can completely wipe you out. Good investing isn't about chasing the highest returns. It's about earning pretty good returns that you can sustain without interruption for decades.
It's the classic fable of the tortoise and the hare, except in this version, the tortoise ends up with $80 billion. Which brings us perfectly to our final and perhaps most crucial deep dive of this session. We are looking at Chapter 5, Getting Wealthy versus Staying Wealthy.
This is where the entire psychological framework locks into place, because we learn that the act of getting money and the act of keeping money require 2 entirely different, almost diametrically opposed personalities.
They're 2 completely different games, played on different fields with different rules. Think about it. Getting wealthy requires aggressive risk-taking. It requires boundless optimism. It requires putting yourself out there, swinging for the fences, starting the business, and deeply believing you can beat the statistical odds.
But staying wealthy, actually keeping the money once you have it, that requires the exact psychological opposite. It requires a potent cocktail of frugality, intense paranoia, and a relentless survival mindset. It requires the constant nagging fear that absolutely everything you built can be taken away from you in an instant by forces outside your control.
To truly illustrate this terrifying duality, the book takes us back to the Roaring Twenties, the ultimate historical era of massive boom and devastating bust. Let's look at the intertwined, tragic stories of Jesse Livermore and Abraham Germansky.
Jesse Livermore was, without exaggeration, the greatest stock market trader of his day. He was a genuine prodigy. By his early 30s, he had amassed a personal fortune worth the equivalent of $100 million. But then 1929 arrives. The stock market violently crashes, the Great Depression begins. It was an absolute financial bloodbath. People were losing their entire livelihoods in hours.
And what about Abraham Germansky?
Germansky was a highly successful multimillionaire real estate developer operating in the same era. But during the euphoria leading up to the 1929 crash, Germansky had become heavily leveraged. He had borrowed massive amounts of money to expand his empire, assuming the good times would never end.
And when the crash hit, the banks called in his loans.
Yes. His illiquid real estate couldn't cover his massive debts. He lost absolutely everything. He was entirely wiped out, and he tragically disappeared, presumed to have taken his own life in the wake of the ruin.
It is a devastating story, but unfortunately a very common one from 1929. The leverage destroyed him. But what happened to Jesse Livermore, the trading prodigy, during that exact same crash?
Livermore did the impossible. He possessed the insight to see the crash coming, and he shorted the market.
Let's pause and explain the actual mechanism of shorting for the listener because it's crucial to understanding his state of mind.
Normally, you buy a stock hoping the price goes up. Shorting is the exact opposite. You are betting that the price will crash. Mechanically, you borrow shares of a stock from someone else, sell them immediately at the current high price, and pocket the cash. Then, when the stock price crashes, you buy those shares back at the new, dirt-cheap price, return them to the original owner, and keep the massive difference as pure profit. It is incredibly risky, because if the stock goes up instead of down, your losses are theoretically infinite.
But for Livermore in 1929, the market did crash. It crashed harder than anyone could have predicted. While Germansky and millions of others lost everything, Livermore's short positions printed money. He made the modern equivalent of $3 billion in a single week.
$3 billion. During the worst economic collapse in history, he literally conquered the game of getting wealthy.
He absolutely did. But remember the rule. Staying wealthy is an entirely different psychological game. Yeah. After executing the greatest trade in history, Livermore was flooded with dopamine. He felt completely invincible. He had beat the system, so he assumed he was the system. He completely lost the paranoia required to protect his wealth. He took on larger, more reckless, highly leveraged risks, genuinely believing his intellect could outsmart the chaotic market forever.
And the market humbled him. Just 4 years later, in 1933, Livermore lost every single penny of that $3 billion. He went bankrupt. And tragically, much like Germansky, he eventually took his own life.
Oh my God. It's chilling.
It proves the point violently. Both men were undeniably brilliant at getting wealthy. Both men completely, fatally failed at the entirely separate skill of staying wealthy.
Survival. If you had to distill this entire framework down to one single word, it isn't growth or insight or alpha, it is survival. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating, largely untold stories in modern finance. The forgotten third Beatle of investing.
Everyone who knows anything about finance knows the names Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. They are the ultimate, iconic investing duo.
Right. But 40 years ago, during their rapid ascent, there was actually a third guy. His name was Rick Guerin. They weren't a duo, they were a trio. They made investments together, they interviewed business managers together, they strategized together. Yeah. Rick was widely considered to be just as inherently smart and capable as Warren and Charlie. But today, nobody knows Rick Guerin's name. He completely vanished from the billionaire leaderboards. Why?
He vanished because of how he chose to play the game of staying wealthy. Years later, Warren Buffett explicitly explained what happened to his friend. During the massive, brutal market downturn of 1973 and 1974, the stock market dropped almost 70%. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
Warren and Charlie survived that crash easily because they played the survival game. They didn't have personal debt. They could just sit back and wait for the snow to start accumulating again. But Rick Guerin had used massive margin loans.
Explain the mechanics of a margin loan. How does it actively destroy you in a crash?
A margin loan is when you borrow money directly from your brokerage firm to buy more stock than you could normally afford. It amplifies your gains, but it identically amplifies your losses. And here is the deadly trap. If the value of your stock drops too far, the brokerage firm issues a margin call. They demand that you immediately deposit more cash into your account to cover the borrowed money. If you don't have the cash, the firm will forcibly sell your stock at the absolute bottom of the crash to get their money back. You have no say in the matter.
So Rick Guerin got hit with margin calls.
Exactly. When the market crashed 70%, Rick was forced into a corner by his own leverage. He was forced to sell his shares of Berkshire Hathaway stock to Warren Buffett for under $40 apiece just to survive the margin calls and satisfy the bank.
Under $40. And a single share of Berkshire Hathaway today is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He missed out on all of it.
Warren Buffett summarized it perfectly. He said, Rick was just as smart as us, but he was in a hurry.
He was in a hurry. That is haunting. He fundamentally understood compounding, but he wanted the glacier to form faster. So he took on debt to speed it up, which completely eliminated his margin of safety. He got wiped out not because he lacked the intellect of Buffett, but because he didn't respect the intense paranoia required to stay in the game long enough for the math to work.
That is the raw essence of staying wealthy. It is structuring your financial life in a way that guarantees you are never, ever forced to sell your assets at the worst possible time.
Okay, I have to jump in here with a real-world dilemma. If staying wealthy is entirely about survival, about building a fortress to avoid forced liquidation, how should we fundamentally view cash? Because if you listen to modern financial media, the constant beating drum is cash is trash. They tell you inflation is an invisible tax eating your money. Sitting on cash is like holding an ice cube in your hand on a hot day. You're slowly, inevitably losing purchasing power. So why on earth would a rational person sit on a massive, uninvested pile of cash?
That logic, cash is trash, is the standard mathematically correct spreadsheet logic. Yes, inflation erodes the purchasing power of a dollar, but the psychology of money entirely flips that spreadsheet logic on its head. The author introduces this concept as your room for error, or your margin of safety.
Walk me through exactly how cash functions as a margin of safety.
You have to stop thinking of cash as an underperforming investment that is only earning 1% interest in a savings account. You must reframe it psychologically. Cash is an insurance policy on the rest of your life. Let's say a massive, unforeseen personal emergency happens. You suddenly lose your job, or your roof caves in, or a global pandemic hits and the stock market instantly drops 40%. If your portfolio is entirely invested in the market and you have zero cash reserves, what happens?
You have to pay rent, so you are forced to sell your stock.
Exactly. You are forced to sell your stocks at the absolute bottom of a crash. You permanently interrupt the compounding process. You lock in a 40% loss. You become Rick Guerin. But if you hold a substantial pile of cash, a thick margin of safety, you can simply use that cash to pay for the emergency. You don't have to touch your investments. You don't have to sell a single share of stock. Therefore, when you look back at that scenario, that cash didn't just earn you a measly 1% interest. By preventing you from being forced to lock in a 40% loss on your entire portfolio, that pile of cash essentially earned a massive, invisible return. It saved your financial life.
That is an incredibly brilliant reframing. The cash isn't supposed to grow. The cash is the moat around the castle that allows the investments inside to grow uninterrupted.
Precisely. The single most important part of any robust financial plan is planning on the plan not going according to plan. You have to assume there will be severe market crashes, unexpected medical bills, and terrifying periods of unemployment. If your financial strategy only works when everything in your life and the global economy goes perfectly, you have absolutely zero room for error. A single bad summer will melt your glacier.
You have to survive the harsh summers to get the magic of the Ice Age compounding.
Frugality, patience, and a healthy dose of paranoia. That is the true algorithm for staying wealthy.
Let's take a breath and synthesize this high-speed mental sprint we just went on.
We have covered a massive expanse of psychological terrain today.
We really did.
Yeah.
We started by dismantling the illusion of our own financial worldview. We realized that our deeply held beliefs are constructed from a microscopic, highly distorted slice of reality on our own personal 3D topographical peak. We learned that the tech bro and the janitor aren't crazy. They are just reacting to the vastly different worlds they've experienced.
We unmasked the invisible, omnipotent siblings of luck and risk, realizing that nothing is ever quite as flawlessly good or as devastatingly bad as it initially seems, and that the line between a visionary genius and a reckless failure is terrifyingly thin.
We stared into the dark abyss of the moving goalpost. We saw the sheer, life-destroying, freedom-stealing power of never enough, and realized that social comparison is an infinite ladder that you can only win by stepping off.
We watched the quiet, logic-defying, slow-motion magic of compounding. The realization that Warren Buffett's true, unmatched superpower wasn't just his brilliant brain, but the 96% of his incredible wealth that accumulated after his mid-60s, simply because he refused to interrupt the snow.
And finally, we learned that getting money and keeping it are two entirely fundamentally different beasts. Getting it requires bold, optimistic risk. Keeping it requires the survivalist paranoia of Jesse Livermore's early days, combined with the relentless, quiet patience of Ronald Read.
It's a complete foundational rewiring of how the human brain perceives financial success.
So as we wrap up this first session, here is a direct call to you, the listener. I want you to actively examine your own life right now. Look closely at your daily financial habits, your career anxieties, your investment choices. Which invisible, unexamined script is driving your decisions? Are you operating out of a generational trauma or a personal fear you haven't fully recognized? Are you constantly exhausting yourself looking at the rung above you on the social comparison ladder? And most importantly, are you in too much of a hurry, like the forgotten Rick Guerin, secretly leveraging your future for a faster payout? Or are you quietly chopping wood in the Vermont snow like Ronald Read, letting time do the heavy lifting?
It ultimately comes down to radical self-awareness.
But before we go, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought, something for you to actively mull over until our next deep dive.
What is the lingering question?
We have firmly established today that the ultimate required secret to staying wealthy is a heavy dose of paranoia. It requires a constant nagging fear of ruin. It requires an active survival mode mentality, always keeping a thick margin of safety, always expecting the plan to fail, always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yes, the exact mindset required to not end up like Abraham Jermansky.
Exactly. But if you have to actively wire your neurobiology to be constantly paranoid, fearful, and fiercely frugal just to keep your wealth, does that mean the people who are biologically best equipped to hold on to their money are fundamentally incapable of actually enjoying it once they finally have it? Does the very survival mechanism required to build the fortune simultaneously destroy your human capacity for joy? Did Ronald Read, the janitor, die with $8 million simply because his ingrained paranoia wouldn't let him spend a single dime on his own comfort?
That is the ultimate inescapable paradox of the psychology of money.
It really is a terrifying thought. Chew on that. Keep questioning the invisible scripts running in your head. Our deep dive continues next time in part 2, where we're going to explore the seductive power of pessimism, the invisible price tags hidden on success, and the fascinating paradox of the man in the car. We will see you in the next conversation. What if the secret to building massive generational wealth is just accepting that you are going to be completely, spectacularly wrong about almost everything you do?
Oh, man. It is a terrifying thought.
Right. I mean, that your brilliant ideas will mostly fail, your investments will just flatline, and your grand plans will largely end up in the garbage.
It goes against literally every instinct we have been taught about competence, But mathematically and psychologically, it is the absolute truth of how fortunes are actually built.
Welcome back to part 2 of our deep dive into the psychology of money.
Yeah.
If you were with us for part 1, we established a pretty grim baseline.
Very grim.
Yeah, we realized that getting money and keeping money are like two entirely different sports.
Yeah.
And that staying wealthy requires a borderline pathological level of paranoia.
It really does. You have to be terrified it can all go away.
Exactly. But today we are picking up right where we left off. We're going to look at the other side of that coin. We are moving away from the mechanics of survival and stepping into the chaotic, ego-driven realities of the human brain.
The landscape we're walking into today is so fascinating because it forces us to dismantle the very foundations of how we, measure success.
We are going to aggressively rewire how you, the listener, visualize success. We're ripping the shiny price tags off luxury items and looking at what they actually represent.
And we're going to expose the hidden math of actual wealth and look at why our biological wiring actively sabotages our financial independence.
So let's jump right into this dopaminergic sprint. We established last time that you have to play defense to survive, but you can't just play defense forever.
No, eventually you need massive needle-moving returns.
Right. And the instinct, the way we were all conditioned from kindergarten, honestly, is that to get those returns, you have to be right all the time. You have to be a sniper. You take the shot, you hit the bullseye.
That is the assumption, yes. I mean, we are conditioned by the school system that a 90% success rate is an A and a 50% success rate is an F. It's a catastrophic failure.
You failed the class.
Exactly. So naturally, we map that academic framework onto investing, business, your career. We assume the great investors, the great entrepreneurs are just right almost all the time.
Like they have some crystal ball or something.
Right, but the data completely shatters that illusion. The reality is that you do not get massive returns by being right all the time. You get them by letting the tails carry you.
The tails. Okay, let's unpack this mechanism, because this is where the traditional narrative just entirely breaks down.
Yeah.
When we talk about tails in this context, we aren't talking about a steady, predictable climb.
No, not at all.
We are talking about the absolute furthest extremes of a distribution, right? The outlier.
Exactly. If you look at the distribution of outcomes in almost any complex system, whether it's business, art, investing, real estate, the vast majority of events just cluster in the middle.
They mean very little in the grand scheme.
Right. They are basically noise. The tails are the outlying 1 in 1,000 or 1 in a million events. And what is absolutely critical to understand is that these rare tail events drive almost all the huge, profitable, famous outcomes.
So it's not about batting 1,000. It's about accepting that you are going to strike out constantly, like all the time.
Constantly.
But knowing that when you finally hit the ball, it leaves the solar system. And that one single hit, mathematically, erases 1,000 strikeouts.
That is the exact dynamic. Let's look at a real-world example, the life of Heinz Berggruen. He was an incredibly famous art dealer and collector.
Okay, Heinz Berggruen.
Yeah, and by the time of his death, he had amassed this astonishing collection of Picassos, Braques, Klees, Matisses. I mean, he was universally hailed as an absolute genius of the art world.
So people assumed he just never missed.
Exactly. The public and the media looked at his collection and assumed he had a golden eye. They assumed he could just walk into a studio, look at a canvas, and instantly know, that is a masterpiece.
But the reality of his acquisition strategy was completely different, right? He wasn't a sniper at all.
Not even close. The reality of his genius was volume, patience, and a surprisingly high tolerance for garbage.
Garbage.
Yeah, I mean, it is estimated that perhaps 99% of the works Berggruen acquired in his life turned out to be of little to no value. They were absolute duds.
Wait, hold on. 99%. So he was essentially running a warehouse of failed art.
He was, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter because he held on to that massive, chaotic portfolio of art, and within that sprawling mix were the 1% that turned out to be the work of someone like Picasso.
Oh, wow.
And that 1% paid for the 99% of junk, covered all his overhead, and still made him a billionaire.
That completely flips the script on how we perceive expertise. I mean, he wasn't sitting there with a monocle perfectly identifying the next masterpiece every single time.
No, he was acting like a wildly enthusiastic curator of a chaotic, largely worthless museum.
That is such a cinematic way to visualize it. He just bought enough and held on long enough to guarantee that he would capture the tail event.
And you might think, well, that's the subjective art world, right? Art is notoriously fickle.
Sure, beauty is in the eye of the beholder and all that.
Exactly. But the exact same ruthless math applies to hard, data-driven finance. Take venture capital.
Okay, the math nerds.
All right. The data from Correlation Ventures, looking at over 21,000 venture financings from 2004 to 2014, reveals the same brutal reality.
What does the breakdown look like?
If a VC firm makes 50 investments, they generally expect half of them to fail completely, to go to absolute zero. Another 10 might just return the initial capital, but 1 or 2 will be absolute bonanzas.
And those 1 or 2 drive everything.
They drive 100% of the entire fund's returns.
I can kind of wrap my head around that for venture capital. I mean, they are literally funding crazy startups out of garages.
Yeah.
You expect high failure rates when you're investing in like an app that claims it's going to revolutionize how we walk our dog.
Right. It's inherently risky.
But what absolutely blows my mind, what really breaks my brain, is that this exact same dynamic governs the broad, supposedly safe public stock market.
This is where the illusion of safety really gets dismantled. Look at the Russell 3000 index. This isn't a handful of risky garage startups.
This is a broad collection of large, established public companies, the bedrock of the economy.
Exactly. But the data from JP Morgan Asset Management shows that since 1980, 40% of all Russell 3000 companies lost at least 70% of their value and never recovered.
Let that sink in for a second for everyone listening. 40%. Almost half of the companies in this massive bedrock index effectively failed.
Failed completely.
If you were individually picking those stocks, you would feel like the worst investor on the planet. You would be losing money almost half the time.
You would feel like a total imposter. But despite 40% of the companies cratering, the Russell 3000 index overall increased more than 73-fold since 1980.
See, how does that math even work conceptually? How does a system where half the components are dying grow by 73 times?
Because of the tails. Just 7% of the companies in that index performed so astronomically well that they more than offset the massive graveyard of duds.
So, just like Heinz Berggruen, but instead of Picasso and Matisse, the tail events were companies like Apple and Amazon.
Exactly. The 7% carried the 93%.
I want you, the listener, to really absorb the psychological relief hidden in this data. You can be wrong a lot.
A staggering amount, really.
You could be wrong almost half the time in public markets, or 90% of the time in venture capital, or 99% of the time in art collecting, and still make an absolute fortune.
It's so liberating when you actually internalize it.
It is. Stop trying to perfectly optimize every single decision. Stop beating yourself up when a project fails or an investment dips. Your portfolio, your career trajectory, your entire life, they are all tail-driven.
It fundamentally changes how you process failure. If you accept that tails drive everything, you realize it is completely normal, even necessary, for lots of things to go wrong, break, fail, and just fall apart.
Right. If you are a good business leader, half your ideas will flop.
If you are a good investor, most years will be just okay, and plenty will be downright bad. The psychological trap is looking at a Warren Buffett and assuming every decision he ever made was a stroke of genius.
That he just never bought a bad stock.
But Buffett himself noted at a 2013 meeting that he owned 400 to 500 stocks during his life and made almost all of his money on just 10 of them.
10 out of 500.
Yes. And Charlie Munger even pointed out that if you remove just a few of Berkshire Hathaway's top investments, their long-term track record drops from legendary to pretty average.
It makes me think of Napoleon's definition of a military genius.
Oh.
He said a genius is the man who can do the average thing when all those around him are going crazy.
I love that quote. It is the perfect distillation of wealth accumulation. Your financial success isn't determined by making brilliant, hyper-complex micro-decisions on a random Tuesday.
Staring at spreadsheets.
Right. It is determined by how you react during the 1% of the time when everyone else is absolutely panicking.
It's the old aviation joke. Flying a plane is hours and hours of total boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror.
Exactly. How you behaved as an investor during a few terrifying months in late 2008 and early 2009 likely had a profound impact on your lifetime returns than everything you did from 2000 to 2008 combined.
Because that was the 1% moment.
The tails drive the results, but capturing the tails requires you to survive the terror. You have to do the average thing, which usually means just holding on, trusting the math, and not selling in a blind panic when everyone else is losing their minds.
Okay, so if we accept this reality, that massive financial returns are generated by surviving long enough for these rare tail events to carry us, it forces us to ask a much deeper question.
Which is?
What is the actual utility of this wealth we are accumulating? Why are we playing this game at all? It can't just be to have a higher score on a banking app than our neighbor.
No, definitely not.
What are we actually trying to buy with these tail-driven returns?
We are trying to buy the single most valuable, non-renewable resource in existence.
Time.
And to understand the psychology here, we have to look at the work of Angus Campbell. He was a psychologist at the University of Michigan in 1981.
Okay, set the scene for 1981 psychology.
Well, context is important here. In 1981, psychology as a field was overwhelmingly focused on disorders. It was obsessed with depression, anxiety, trauma. Campbell went the other way. He wanted to study well-being.
You wanted to know what actually worked.
Exactly. He wanted to know what actually made people feel a sense of happiness and contentment.
And his findings completely contradicted the American dream narrative, didn't they?
That's fair.
He didn't find that happiness was tied to specific zip codes or Ivy League degrees or executive job titles.
Not at all. Campbell found that the most powerful common denominator of happiness wasn't income level, geography, or education. It was having a strong, undeniable sense of controlling one's own life.
Autonomy.
Yes. He concluded that having the control to do what you want, when you want to, with the people you want to, is the broadest, most impactful lifestyle variable that makes people happy. It dwarfs your salary. It dwarfs the square footage of your house.
So the ultimate dividend of money isn't stuff at all. It's autonomy. This reminds me of Derek Sivers. His story is the absolute perfect illustration of this concept.
Oh, Seavers is a great example.
So for the listeners, Sivers was a 22-year-old living in Midtown Manhattan. He's making $20,000 a year, which even back then was essentially minimum wage.
Right, barely scraping by on paper.
Exactly. Society looks at a 22-year-old making $20K in Manhattan and says, this guy is losing the game of capitalism.
By every traditional metric of visible success, he was at the bottom of the ladder.
But Sivers didn't care about the visible metrics. He ruthlessly minimized his expenses. He got his cost of living down to $1,000 a month. He never ate out. He never took a taxi. He lived like a monk.
Pure financial efficiency.
And over 2 years, he managed to save up $12,000. And with that $12,000, he quit his day job to become a full-time musician. He bought his absolute freedom.
He won the game at age 22. Not by earning millions of dollars, not by catching a tail event in the stock market, but by lowering his needs so drastically that a relatively tiny amount of money could buy back 100% of his time.
Okay, but I have to push back a little here, because living on $1,000 a month in Manhattan sounds like absolute misery to most people.
Oh, it sounds awful.
It sounds like deprivation. How does the psychology actually work where Sivers feels liberated instead of just feeling poor and restricted?
It's all about locus of control. If you were forced to live on $1,000 a month because you were drowning in debt and your boss cuts your hours, it feels like psychological torture. You have no control.
Right, you're trapped.
But if you actively choose to live on $1,000 a month because every dollar you don't spend is actively buying your future freedom, it feels like power. The deprivation transforms into agency.
That's a really profound distinction. I visualize money in this context not as stacks of paper, but as literal blocks of autonomy.
Blocks of autonomy, I like that.
Yeah, like every $100 you save is a piece of your future Tuesday morning that you just bought back from a boss, or a miserable commute, or a corporate structure you hate. Sivers just hoarded enough of those blocks to buy every single Tuesday morning for the rest of his foreseeable future.
And that is the highest intrinsic value of money. It is a time machine. But if we pull back and look at the macro picture, this concept explains a profound modern paradox.
Which is?
Statistically, we are, on average, historically richer than almost any previous generation. We have more purchasing power, more technology, more conveniences, yet psychological surveys consistently show we do not feel noticeably happier.
Why? Because we spent the money wrong.
Exactly. We used our increased historical wealth to buy bigger houses, fancier cars, and more consumer goods. But in the process of buying all that stuff, we took on more debt and locked ourselves into more demanding, inflexible jobs.
We bought a cage.
We actually lost control over our time. We traded our autonomy for stuff.
We traded our future freedom for a heavier ball and chain made of depreciating assets. Which brings us to Carl Pillimer's massive research project.
Yes, the 30 Lessons for Living.
Right. He wrote this book where he interviewed 1,000 elderly Americans. He went to the people who had lived through the entirety of the 20th century, people looking back at the totality of their lives to find out what actually matters in the end.
And when you ask people at the end of their lives what brought them happiness, the answers are staggering in their uniformity, and it is the absolute absence of materialism.
None of them cared about the big house.
Out of 1,000 elderly people, 0, not a single person, said that happiness comes from working hard to buy the things you want. 0 said it's important to be wealthier than the people around you.
0 out of 1,000. In statistical research, a flat 0 is almost impossible. It's a data point that should stop you in your tracks.
What they actually valued were quality friendships, being part of something bigger than themselves, and spending unstructured time with their children. As Pilmer wrote, your kids don't want your money anywhere near as much as they want you.
They just want your time and your presence.
Exactly.
So we have psychologists from the 1980s telling us autonomy is the key to well-being. We have 1,000 elderly Americans telling us from their deathbeds that stuff doesn't matter and time does.
The data is universal.
It is screaming at us. So why the hell is everyone still blowing their money on ridiculously expensive depreciating status symbols? If we know it doesn't buy happiness, why is the luxury goods market absolutely booming?
Because logic and data are no match for the human ego.
The ego always wins.
Always. To understand why we buy things that actively destroy our autonomy, we have to look at the man in the car paradox.
This concept is incredibly visceral. The author of our source material worked as a valet at a luxury hotel in Los Angeles during his college years.
Right, parking the aristocratic fleet.
Yeah, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Rolls-Royces. And he admits his own bias up front, which I really appreciate. He looked at those cars and thought, I want one of these. If I drive a Ferrari, it sends a massive signal to the world. People will see me and think I'm smart, I'm rich, I have elite taste, I'm important.
It's the biological urge to signal competence and status to the tribe. We all have it.
But as he spent more time around these cars, he noticed the paradox. Think about your own reaction. When you see a Ferrari screaming down the street, what do you actually do? You rarely, if ever, look at the driver and think, wow, the person behind that wheel is so cool, I deeply admire them.
Never. You completely ignore the driver.
You ignore the driver, you stare at the car, and you immediately imagine yourself in the driver's seat.
Yep.
You think about how much people would admire you if you were the one driving it.
This is the ultimate tragedy of luxury signaling. It's like spending $500,000 to rent a giant neon billboard to advertise how awesome you are to the world.
But the billboard is entirely made of mirrors.
Exactly. You are driving around in this incredibly loud, expensive mirror. Everyone who looks at your car is just looking at their own reflection.
They are projecting their own fantasies of wealth onto the object while completely, utterly ignoring you, the actual human being who paid for it.
It really is a psychological tragedy. People bankrupt themselves buying luxury goods to signal that they are important and deserve admiration. It is a fundamental, deeply human desire to want respect from our peers.
We all want to be loved and respected.
But the paradox is that onlookers do not give the owner the admiration they are seeking. They just use the owner's object as a benchmark for their own desires.
So you buy the Lamborghini specifically to get respect, but the Lamborghini actually acts as a barrier to respect because it just triggers everyone else's ego.
Yes.
You end up feeling isolated, wondering why people don't love you more now that you have the cool car, not realizing that nobody even sees you. They just see the car.
And if we connect this back to what actually generates human connection, the text makes a very blunt point. If your genuine goal is respect and admiration from other people, horsepower and chrome are the absolute least efficient ways to get it.
What's the better way?
Humility, kindness, and empathy yield an infinitely higher return on investment for social respect than expensive visible possessions ever will.
Which is a really tough pill to swallow because our entire modern culture is built on visible signaling. If you scroll through social media for 5 minutes, it is nothing but people using luxury goods as proxies for success.
It's unavoidable.
Which leads us to a massive semantic problem. If visible status symbols are a mirror billboard that doesn't buy respect or autonomy, it fundamentally breaks how we identify financial success in the wild. We have to confront the critical difference between being rich and being wealthy.
Oh, failing to understand the difference between those two words is the root cause of countless financial disasters.
We treat them as synonyms, but they are entirely different concepts. Let's look at the story of Rihanna.
This story perfectly encapsulates the absurdity of the trap.
It really does. So singer Rihanna, at the height of her fame, nearly went completely bankrupt after a period of massive, unchecked overspending.
Just blowing through millions.
Right. In response, she sued her financial advisor, blaming him for her financial ruin. And the advisor's defense in court was incredibly blunt, almost insulting, but perfectly accurate regarding the mechanics of money.
What did he say?
He essentially said, was it really necessary to tell her that if you spend money on things, you will end up with the things and not the money?
It sounds like a joke, but it highlights a profound cognitive dissonance. People constantly say, I want to be a millionaire.
Right.
But what they usually mean in practice is, I want to spend $1 million. And spending $1 million is literally the exact opposite of being a millionaire.
It really is. The act of buying the $1 million house is the act of losing $1 million in cash.
Precisely. Let's strictly define the terms. Rich is a measure of current income. If someone is driving a $100,000 car, they are almost certainly rich because even if they bought that car with massive amounts of debt, they need a high level of monthly cash flow income just to afford the payments.
Right. You have to be pulling in cash to float the lifestyle.
Exactly. Richness is loud. It is highly visible. People go out of their way to make sure you know they are rich.
Rich is kinetic energy. It is cash flowing into a bank account and immediately burning off into the atmosphere as heat, noise, and fancy exhaust notes. You can see it, you can hear it, you can measure it by looking at someone's driveway.
But wealth is entirely different. Wealth is hidden. Wealth is income not spent.
Income not spent.
Yes. It is an option not yet taken to buy something later. Its true value lies in offering you options, flexibility, and growth.
So wealth is the ghost of the Ferrari you didn't buy. It's the phantom first-class upgrade you declined. It's the Rolex that is still sitting in the jewelry store display case because you decided to leave that $10,000 in an index fund.
I love that.
Wealth is invisible potential energy, tightly coiled and waiting.
And this highlights exactly why building wealth is so psychologically grueling for the human brain. We are highly visual, mimetic creatures. We learn how to behave by imitating the successful people we see around us.
Monkey see and monkey do.
Exactly. But modern capitalism is a highly tuned machine designed to help people fake it till they make it. We are constantly surrounded by millions of highly visible, rich role models. We see their cars, their vacation photos, their massive houses.
But we have almost zero visible, wealthy role models.
Because, by definition, their success is hidden. You cannot see the cars they didn't buy, you cannot see the size of their brokerage accounts or their 40% savings rates.
So if you are a young person trying to figure out how to be successful in the world and you look around for role models, you see people spending massive amounts of money. Your brain naturally concludes, that is what successful people do. They spend.
So you emulate them.
But emulating the spending habits of the rich is literally the exact action that destroys your ability to ever become wealthy. It is a complete, systemic, societal trap.
You are mimicking the exhaust, not the engine. The author quotes investor Bill Mann, who sums this up perfectly. He says there is no faster way to feel rich than to spend lots of money on really nice things.
But the way to be wealthy is to spend money you have, and to not spend money you don't have.
And going even further, wealth is the money you do have that you actively choose not to spend.
It requires a massive amount of cognitive restraint. You have to actively choose to ignore the visible signals of success around you and trust in the invisible math of what you are accumulating in secret.
It's hard. It goes against everything we feel.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together because we are arriving at the crux of this entire framework. If wealth is invisible potential energy, if buying things doesn't actually buy us the respect we biologically crave, and if autonomy is the only thing that actually guarantees human happiness,
right,
how do we systematically accumulate this hidden power? What is the actual mechanism?
The answer lies in the single most unsexy, boring, yet completely controllable metric in finance.
Let me guess. The savings rate.
The savings rate. It may be unsexy, but it is the ultimate lever of control. Building wealth has very little to do with your income or your investment returns, and almost everything to do with your savings rate.
Okay, convince me.
To explain why, let's look at the brilliant analogy of the 1970s energy crisis.
Oh, the era of the energy doomers. Set the stage for us.
In the 1970s, the world was facing a massive oil crisis. There were lines wrapping around the block at gas stations. The doomers of the era believed we were literally going to run out of oil and that the global industrial economy would collapse as a result.
Total panic.
Exactly. They were looking exclusively at the macro environment, the supply of oil coming out of the ground in the Middle East, and predicting absolute disaster because it was entirely out of their control.
But the global economy didn't collapse. We didn't run out of oil. How did we fix it?
What actually solved the energy crisis wasn't discovering massively more oil, it was personal conservation and efficiency.
Efficiency.
Yes, we built cars that got vastly better gas mileage. We built more energy-efficient factories. We weatherized our homes. We solved a terrifying macro problem by utilizing micro-efficiency.
We couldn't control the massive oil fields halfway across the world, but we absolutely could control the efficiency of the engines in our own driveways.
Exactly. And the same exact dynamic applies to your money. You cannot control investment returns. You cannot guarantee what the stock market will do over the next decade, or if your specific career field will experience a boom or a bust.
And those are the macro oil fields.
Right. They are completely outside your locus of control. But your personal savings rate and your frugality, that is your financial conservation and efficiency. That is the engine, and it is 100% in your control.
Let's run the ROI analogy, the return on investment, because this proves mathematically why the engine matters so much more than the fuel.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine two different investors. Investor A is an absolute genius. They pick great stocks and earn a 12% annual return on their investments, which is incredible.
Very high returns, yeah.
but their lifestyle bloats instantly. Every time their portfolio goes up, they buy a nicer car, they take a more expensive vacation. They need a massive, constantly growing amount of money just to maintain their baseline level of happiness.
Now, contrast them with Investor B. Investor B is a very mediocre investor. They only earn an 8% return. But Investor B needs half as much money to be happy. Their lifestyle is highly efficient.
Financially speaking, Investor B is vastly superior.
Right.
They are extracting more actual benefit, more peace of mind from their investments despite having lower returns.
Right, because learning to be happy with less money creates a massive gap between what you have and what you want.
Increasing your efficiency provides the exact same financial benefit as getting a massive raise at work, but it is infinitely easier to achieve and completely within your control.
And this leads to one of the most profound psychological reframings of money I have ever encountered. The text defines savings this way. Savings is just the gap between your ego and your income.
Whoa. Let me just repeat that so it really sinks in.
Mm.
Savings is the gap between your ego and your income.
That's powerful, right?
If we assume that spending beyond a basic level of comfort is mostly just a reflection of ego, like it's spending money to show other people that you have money, then one of the most effective ways to increase your savings isn't to work 80 hours a week begging for a higher salary.
No, it's to actively, intentionally raise your humility.
It is an ego deflation exercise.
Mhm.
Every time you choose not to upgrade your lifestyle to match your peers, you are widening that gap.
Exactly. When you choose not to buy the flashy car, or you decline the upgraded flight, you aren't just hoarding cash.
You are literally capturing your suppressed vanity, taking that kinetic energy and converting it into financial body armor. You are taking your ego and forging it into a shield.
And you desperately need that shield because of what we call field mice.
Field mice. Okay, this gets into the philosophy of saving for absolutely no reason, which is very counterintuitive.
We are typically taught by financial advisors to save for specific predictable goals, save for a 20% down payment on a house, save for a new car in 5 years, save for retirement at age 65.
Right, every dollar needs a job.
But saving only for specific predictable goals assumes that you live in a predictable world. And as we discussed with the Tales and the Russell 3000, we do not live in a predictable world.
The world is deeply chaotic.
It is. Therefore, you should save just for saving's sake. You save for the unpredictable, chaotic curveballs of life that you cannot possibly foresee. You save for the financial equivalent of field mice unexpectedly chewing through the wiring of your car.
You can't budget for that.
No. Saving without a spending goal is a generalized hedge against life's inevitable ability to surprise the hell out of you at the worst possible moment.
If you only save for the car, what happens when the roof caves in? If you only save for the roof, what happens when you get laid off? Saving for no reason is the only way to protect against the unknown unknowns.
And beyond just protecting you from emergencies, this unearmarked savings gives you the ultimate dividend we talked about earlier. Autonomy. Unearmarked savings give you options. They give you the flexibility to wait, to think, to change course on your own terms, which pushes us into a really fascinating socioeconomic point.
Okay.
Why is this personal flexibility so much more critical today than it was, say, 100 years ago?
That's a great question. It represents a massive historical shift in how human value is calculated. Think about how the world worked a century ago. It was hyper-local.
Right, isolated towns.
The vast majority of people didn't have telephones, let alone the internet. Competition was entirely constrained by geography.
Yeah.
If you were a worker with average intelligence, but you were the best blacksmith or the best accountant in your specific town, you got treated like the best. You didn't have to compete with a smarter worker in a town 500 miles away.
You had a localized monopoly on your skills. But now that geographic moat is completely gone.
Okay.
Now we live in a hyper-connected, hyper-competitive global economy. Pure intelligence is no longer a sustainable advantage because there is always someone smarter somewhere in the world who can do your job.
Or a machine that can do it.
Right. Technical skills are increasingly automated by software. So, what is the ultimate competitive edge in a modern world where raw intelligence and technical skills are rapidly commoditized?
It's flexibility.
Yes, nuanced soft skills and absolute flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
If you have cash in the bank, even if that cash is sitting there earning 0% interest, it gives you the flexibility to wait for a no-brainer opportunity.
You can bide your time.
It gives you the leeway to change careers entirely or to take a job with a lower salary but vastly more purpose. It gives you the time to learn a completely new skill when your entire industry gets disrupted by a new technology.
That is the hidden Massive return on wealth. Everyone looks at cash sitting in a checking account earning 0% and thinks, what a waste, I'm losing purchasing power to inflation. I need to invest it immediately.
But they are missing the point.
Completely missing it. If that uninvested cash allows you to confidently walk away from a toxic boss or pivot to a new industry right as it's taking off without worrying about paying your mortgage next month, the return on that cash isn't 0%, it's incalculable. It's infinite. That cash is the fuel that powers your flexibility.
But maintaining that flexibility, you are essentially taking a point in the future that would have otherwise been owned by someone else, an employer, a creditor, a bank, and you are giving it back to yourself. You're reclaiming your timeline.
We have covered massive paradigm-shifting ground here today. Let's do a rapid synthesis to lock this all in.
Let's do it.
We started with the realization that you don't need to be perfect. You just have to survive long enough.
Yeah.
Because outliers, the long tails, drive all the massive gains in the world.
And we learned that the highest possible dividend of those gains isn't luxury, it's autonomy. It's buying back your Tuesday mornings like Derek Sivers.
We exposed the mirror trap of the Ferrari, realizing that flashy cars don't actually buy respect. They just trigger the insecurities and egos of everyone watching.
We redefine true wealth as the invisible potential energy, the things you actively didn't buy.
And finally, we realized that your savings rate isn't just a dry math equation. It is literally your ego held in check, converted into financial body armor to buy you the ultimate modern competitive advantage: complete flexibility.
It really is a complete paradigm shift from how finance is traditionally taught. It moves the conversation entirely away from spreadsheets, interest rates, and stock picking, and places it squarely in the realm of psychology, behavior, and emotional regulation. Wealth isn't about what you earn, it's about how you behave.
Which leaves me with a final, somewhat provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up this session.
Lay it on us.
If your ego is the true enemy of your wealth, as we've discussed, and if actual wealth is completely invisible, it's the cars not bought, the upgrades declined, the cash quietly sitting in reserve. Does that mean the ultimate evolutionary advantage in our hyper-connected, hyper-visible society is actually stealth wealth?
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about it. In a modern world where absolutely everyone is screaming for attention, bankrupting themselves to project an image of success on social media or in their driveway, is becoming completely financially unnoticeable, the most radical act of rebellion you can commit today.
That is a profound question. By choosing to be invisible, by refusing to signal, you are opting out of the ego-driven game that everyone else is quietly destroying themselves to play. You become untouchable.
Exactly. You are hoarding those blocks of autonomy in secret. You are building an invisible fortress while everyone else is building glass houses. Something to think about the next time a Lamborghini revs its engine next to you at a stoplight.
Let them have the noise.
Let them have the noise. That wraps up part 2 of our deep dive into the psychology of money. But do not get comfortable, because in part 3, we are venturing even further into the psychology of our chaotic brains.
We're going to look at why being reasonable is actually better than being rational, why studying history is a terrible guide to the future, and why nothing, absolutely nothing, is free.
It's only going to get deeper and a lot weirder from here. We'll see you in part 3. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are exploring a deeply uncomfortable truth.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, trying to be perfectly rational with your money, it is actually the fastest way to go completely broke.
It really is. It sounds so backwards, but it's true.
Right. We're going to look at why injecting a patient with malaria might actually be the most profound financial metaphor ever recorded.
That story is just wild.
It's insane. And we're going to show you why those pristine, color-coded spreadsheets you've been relying on are just, well, they're fundamentally broken.
It is a massive paradigm shift. I mean, we spend our entire lives being told that finance is a hard science, like it's physics.
Right. Just pure math.
Exactly. You plug your income and your savings rate into a spreadsheet, the cells spit out this crisp, objective number, and boom, that is your future. But today, we're dismantling that.
Completely tearing it down.
We're entering this realm where the math just breaks down because it collides with human neurochemistry.
Yeah. And if you've been riding shotgun with us through this mini-series on the psychology of wealth,
yeah,
you know the journey we've been on.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. We shattered the illusion of control. We explored the absolute terrifying chaos of those twin siblings, luck and risk.
Right.
And we unlocked the mind-bending exponential magic of compounding. But today is different. Today is a fast-paced, dopaminergic sprint into the glitches of the human brain.
I love that, a dopaminergic sprint.
We're starting exactly at Chapter 11, and we are not stopping until we hit the end of Chapter 15. We're diving into the messy, deeply human reality of how money actually works at the dinner table, not on a calculator.
And the paradox we are unpacking today is that to make the absolute best financial decisions for your life, you have to stop striving for mathematical perfection.
Which is so hard for people to accept.
It is.
Yeah.
You have to accept that you are fundamentally terrible at predicting your own future desires. And you have to build a life designed for a world that is completely unimaginable.
So think about your own life for a second. Mentally discard your spreadsheets for the next hour. Just, close Excel.
Delete the tab.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because I want to start with a story from the source material that is so cinematic, it feels like it belongs in some Victorian medical horror novel.
It really does. It's unsettling.
Picture the 19th century. We are looking at this psychiatrist named Julius Wagner Jauregg.
Right.
He's working in asylums, and he is dealing with patients who have severe late-stage neurosyphilis.
Which, just to give context here, was an absolute death sentence at the time.
A total nightmare.
Oh, completely. Before antibiotics, specifically penicillin, syphilis didn't just cause physical ailments. In its late stages, it literally attacked the brain.
It destroyed them.
It caused severe dementia, paralysis, blindness, and this terrifying descent into madness. It was one of the most feared diseases on the planet, and the medical consensus of the 19th century had absolutely no cure.
Weren't they using mercury or something?
Yeah, they were trying mercury treatments, which were essentially just, poisoning the patient slightly slower than the disease was.
Which is just a landscape of total medical desperation.
Yeah.
But Wagner Jauregg, he has two unique traits. He's incredibly observant, and he possesses a level of boldness that borders on the unhinged.
Unhinged is the perfect word for it.
Right. He starts noticing a strange pattern in the asylum. He observes that on the rare occasion, a syphilis patient contracts a secondary, unrelated illness.
Like a completely separate infection.
Exactly. Specifically, something that gives them a prolonged, raging, incredibly high fever. Their syphilis symptoms sometimes mysteriously reverse. Like, they actually recover their sanity.
Because he was recognizing the biological mechanics of heat. The syphilis bacterium Treponema pallidum is highly sensitive to temperature.
It can't survive the fever.
Right. It literally cannot survive in a human body that is running a sustained extreme fever. The intense heat was just cooking the bacteria alive, effectively purging the infection from the brain.
So Wagner Jauregg connects the dots. He realizes the fever is the cure. He needs to induce a massive, prolonged fever in his patients.
But how do you do that in a controlled way before modern medicine?
This is the crazy part. What is his grand Nobel Prize-winning medical solution? He takes strains of malaria, specifically a milder strain, but still, like actual living malaria.
Oh, malaria.
And he deliberately injects it straight into his syphilis patients.
He literally infects a dying patient with another potentially lethal pathogen.
He gave them malaria. It's insane. He induced a deadly disease to cure a deadly disease.
That's just wild to even think about.
And he would let the malaria run its course,
Yeah.
causing these massive spiking 104-degree fevers. And then he would treat the malaria with quinine, which they did actually have a handle on.
Right, they could cure the malaria.
Yeah. And the wildest part of this entire insane experiment, it worked. It saved countless lives. And he won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1927 for this exact procedure.
Now, you have to look at the underlying logic of this because it translates perfectly to the core friction we experience with money.
Okay, lay it out.
From a strictly scientific biological standpoint, his approach was mathematically flawless. It was entirely rational.
The math checks out.
Exactly. The equation is simple. High heat kills the bacteria, malaria generates high heat, therefore introduce malaria into the system. The logic tracks perfectly.
But from a human, emotional, medical ethics standpoint,
It's terrifying.
it is extreme. Injecting a patient with a deadly pathogen is completely unreasonable. If you are the family member of that patient and the doctor said, hey, I'm going to give your husband malaria, your emotional reaction is going to be sheer panic.
You are going to try to stop the procedure immediately.
Right. You'd call the police.
And that friction, the war between the rational mathematical equation and reasonable human emotion, that is the birthplace of almost every catastrophic financial mistake.
That is such a good way to put it.
Because academic finance is absolutely obsessed with finding the mathematically optimal, purely rational strategy. They want the malaria cure.
But they ignore the patient's panic.
Exactly. They completely ignore the fact that the human nervous system cannot handle the treatment.
There is this incredible example of this in the sources, a 2008 study published by a pair of researchers from Yale University.
Oh, I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Yeah, they were looking at young people saving for retirement.
Yeah.
And they ran the numbers to find the mathematically optimal way to build wealth over a lifetime.
And what did they find?
They published a paper arguing that young people should supercharge their retirement accounts by using 2-to-1 margin debt.
Let's break down the mechanics of what that actually means, because the term margin debt gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah, explain that for us.
Buying on margin means you are borrowing money from your brokerage firm to buy more stock than you could afford with your own cash. 2-to-1 margin means for every dollar of your own money you invest, you borrow $2 from the broker. So if you have $10,000 in savings, you are buying $30,000 worth of stock. You are heavily leveraged.
Which just sounds completely insane on its face, like terrifying.
Yeah.
But walk us through the Yale researchers' logic. Why did they think this was actually a good idea?
Because of the timeline.
Yeah.
When you are 24 years old, you have a massive asset, which is time. You have 40 years for your investments to compound.
Right.
But you have a massive deficit capital. You don't have any actual money yet. So mathematically, your exposure to the stock market is out of sync with your time horizon.
Okay, I see where this is going.
The Yale researchers concluded that the completely rational thing to do is borrow aggressively to maximize your market exposure when you are young, capture those early compounding gains, and then slowly pay off the debt and taper down your leverage as you approach retirement.
And the spreadsheet says this works perfectly, right?
The spreadsheet loves it. I mean, they ran the historical data, and the math concluded that employing this 2-to-1 margin strategy would leave a retiree with 90% more wealth compared to someone using a normal, unleveraged life cycle fund.
Wow. 90% more.
From a purely quantitative perspective, it is the holy grail. It is a flawless equation.
Okay, but this is where the spreadsheet completely detaches from reality. Imagine being 24 years old.
Okay, I'm there.
You scrape together your first $10,000. You borrow $20,000 on margin. You have $30,000 in the S&P 500.
Feeling pretty good.
And then a 2008-style financial crisis hits. The market drops 50%. Your $30,000 is now worth $15,000. But you still owe the broker the $20,000 you borrowed.
This is where the mechanics of a margin call just destroy the rational plan. The broker doesn't care about your 40-year time horizon.
They don't care about the Yale study.
Not at all. When the value of your account drops below a certain threshold, they issue a margin call. They demand you deposit more cash immediately to cover the loan.
And a 24-year-old does not have that cash lying around.
Exactly. If you don't have the cash, the broker automatically liquidates your remaining stocks at the absolute bottom of the market to pay themselves back.
You don't even get a say in it. They just sell your assets, lock in your massive losses, and you are left with absolutely nothing.
You are completely wiped out. And you probably still owe them money.
The emotional trauma of experiencing that in your 20s would be so severe, you would be scarred for life. You would never invest in the stock market ever again.
You'd just keep your money in a coffee can in the backyard.
Precisely. The strategy is 100% rational and 100% unreasonable. It ignores human endurance. It assumes the investor is a robot devoid of fear, anxiety, or, the need to sleep at night.
But wait, if the academic formulas are this detached from reality, what do the people who actually invent these formulas do with their own money?
Are they out there leveraging up 2-to-1?
That is the most fascinating part of this entire dynamic. The source material points us to Harry Markowitz.
Oh, the modern portfolio theory guy.
Exactly. If you study finance, Markowitz is basically a god. He literally won the Nobel Prize in economics for mathematically proving the optimal trade-off between risk and return.
He created the efficient frontier.
Right. He built the ultimate, undeniable, academically rigorous spreadsheet for how to perfectly allocate capital.
So his personal portfolio must have been a masterpiece of complex algorithms.
You would think so. But years later, the financial journalist Jason Zweig interviewed Markowitz and asked him, back in the 1950s, when you were developing these groundbreaking models, how did you actually invest your own personal money?
And what did he say?
Markowitz admitted that he completely ignored his own Nobel-winning math.
Wait, he didn't even use it.
He didn't use it. He told Zweig, I visualized my grief if the stock market went way up and I wasn't in it, or if it went way down and I was completely in it. My intention was to minimize my future regret.
Wow.
So what did the godfather of quantitative finance do? He took his money and he split it 50-50, half in bonds, half in equities.
That is the most basic, unsophisticated allocation you could possibly imagine. That's the kind of advice you give to a teenager opening their first account. Half in the safe stuff, half in the risky stuff.
Because Markowitz understood that the mathematical optimization of returns is completely irrelevant if the strategy makes you so anxious that you abandon it during a market panic.
He optimized for sleep.
He optimized for minimizing regret. He chose a strategy that was mathematically suboptimal, but deeply practically reasonable.
I use this analogy all the time when people ask me why they can't stick to a budget. Striving for pure financial rationality is exactly like going on an extreme mathematically perfect diet.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Let's say you want to lose 20 pounds. You consult a nutritionist and they build a spreadsheet. Mathematically, if you consume exactly 1,200 calories a day of plain boiled chicken breast, steamed broccoli, and water.
Sounds miserable.
Right. But you will achieve the perfectly optimal rational rate of fat loss. The spreadsheet dictates you will lose exactly 2 pounds a week.
And biologically, that is true. The thermodynamics are sound.
But psychologically, it is a complete disaster. You start the diet on Monday, you endure the boiled chicken. By Wednesday, you are irritable. By Thursday, you are exhausted and dreaming of carbohydrates.
You're hallucinating bread.
Exactly. And by Friday night, your willpower completely fractures, you snap, and you stress eat an entire large pepperoni pizza and a chocolate cake over the kitchen sink.
We've all been there.
The rational diet fails catastrophically because it assumes you are a calorie-burning machine, not an emotional human being.
And the alternative is the reasonable diet. The reasonable diet factors in your human weakness. It includes a slice of pizza on Friday night.
It builds in pressure release valves.
Right. Now, mathematically, this slows down your fat loss. The spreadsheet will tell you it takes longer to reach your goal. It is suboptimal.
But practically, it's vastly superior.
Because the inclusion of the pizza prevents the psychological fracture. It keeps you compliant. And compliance over a long period of time is the only thing that actually generates results.
That is such a crucial insight. Being reasonable means maximizing how well you sleep at night, which keeps you in the game long enough for compounding to actually work.
Absolutely.
But I have to stop you there. If we just throw away the math and prioritize being, comfortable and reasonable, doesn't that open the door to massive behavioral errors?
What do you mean?
Well, isn't that just a convenient excuse for people to say, hey, it feels reasonable to me to take my life savings and day trade GameStop options because it scratches an itch?
Yeah.
How do we separate being reasonable from being reckless?
That is the exact trap, and it requires a vital distinction. Being reasonable does not mean ignoring reality or embracing reckless gambling.
Okay, so what does it mean?
It means acknowledging your specific psychological friction points and designing a structural containment field around them. You want to adopt a technically imperfect strategy that you love, rather than a mathematically perfect strategy that you will abandon.
Give me an example of what that containment field looks like in the real world.
Let's look at home bias. In global finance, home bias is a massively documented phenomenon. It's the tendency for investors to vastly prefer investing in companies from their own country while completely ignoring the rest of the global market.
Like Americans only buying U.S. stocks.
Exactly. An American investor will put 90% of their money in U.S. stocks, even though the U.S. only makes up about half of the global market cap. An Australian investor will heavily overweight Australian banks and mining companies.
And from an academic standpoint, that is a massive error, right? Because you are failing to diversify geographically. If the U.S. economy stumbles, but emerging markets surge, you miss out completely.
Mathematically, it is highly irrational. You are taking on uncompensated geographic risk, but practically, think about what investing actually is.
It's terrifying.
You are taking the physical labor of your life, your hard-earned savings, and handing it over to strangers in corporate boardrooms, hoping they don't lose it. That requires a massive psychological leap of faith.
Deep trust.
Exactly. And familiarity breeds trust. If you are an American, seeing an Apple store on your drive to work or ordering from Amazon or passing a Ford dealership, that physical familiarity gives you the psychological comfort required to stay invested when the market drops 20%.
You feel like you know the companies.
Right. If your portfolio was full of emerging market equities from companies you've never heard of in countries you've never visited, your conviction would be incredibly fragile.
You'd panic and sell at the first sign of trouble.
So if home bias is the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine of long-term investing go down, it is entirely reasonable to embrace it.
It keeps you in the seat. And the text applies this exact same logic to day trading. It highlights an investor named Josh Brown.
Oh, Josh Brown is brilliant.
Now, Josh Brown is a highly sophisticated financial advisor. He knows the math intimately. He knows the data proves that picking individual stocks is a loser's game for the vast majority of people and that low-cost index funds are the rational choice.
And knows it better than anyone.
But he still allocates a small, strictly defined percentage of his personal portfolio to picking individual stocks. Why? Because he genuinely loves it.
It's fun for him.
He loves the research, he loves the narrative, he loves the thrill of being right about a specific company. It scratches a psychological itch.
But notice the mechanism of containment. He doesn't bet his retirement on it. He carves out a tiny sandbox.
Right, a controlled environment.
By allowing himself a controlled amount of irrational behavior in that sandbox, he releases the psychological pressure. He prevents himself from getting bored, restless, or anxious, which protects his core diversified index fund portfolio from being meddled with.
He contains the chaos, so it protects the core.
Yeah.
That is the essence of being reasonable. Okay, that makes total sense. And it's a massive relief. We don't have to be perfect, emotionless robots. We just have to know where our buttons are and put guardrails around them.
It's very liberating.
But this leads us to an even more terrifying reality. We've been talking about how our internal math is flawed because of our emotions. But the reason we literally can't be perfectly rational goes much deeper than that.
Oh, buckle up.
It's because the external world itself refuses to act rationally. We are trying to build perfect historical models for a world that is constantly mutating in completely unpredictable ways.
We are trying to use a map of the past to navigate a landscape that is experiencing continuous tectonic shifts.
Which brings us to one of the most profound quotes in the entire source text.
Yeah.
It's from a Stanford political science professor named Sky Sagan. He says, "Things that had never happened before happen all the time."
I want to repeat that because it should be carved above the door of every financial institution on Earth. Things that have never happened before happen all the time.
It destroys the entire foundation of how we normally think about planning. We have this massive fallacy where we treat historians as prophets.
Yes.
We look at historical data, especially in economics and investing, as if it were an unassailable physical boundary for the future. We think, well, the market has never dropped more than X% in a single day, so my worst-case scenario should be X.
It's a category error. We confuse economics with the hard sciences. Let's break down why that is so dangerous.
Okay, let's do it.
If you are a geologist, you can look at 1 billion years of sedimentary rock formations, analyze the tectonic plate movements, and you can accurately predict how the Earth's crust will behave tomorrow.
Because rocks don't change their minds.
Right. The physical laws governing rock and magma do not change based on the mood of the planet. Or if you are a nephrologist, you know that a human kidney operates the exact same way today as it did 1,000 years ago.
The biological filtration process is static.
Physics, geology, anatomy, these are guided by immutable, indifferent laws. But economics is not a hard science.
Not even close.
Economics is not guided by immutable laws. Economics is a massive, complex engine driven entirely by human behavior. It is driven by human emotion, the collective stories we tell ourselves, the political environment, and the preferences of a constantly shifting culture.
And those variables never, ever sit still.
The invisible hand of the market is always moving, always adapting, and crucially, always destroying the mechanisms that worked yesterday.
There are two incredibly vivid examples in the text that show exactly what happens when you treat history as a ceiling for the future. The first is a colossal engineering failure, the Fukushima nuclear disaster in 1911.
This one is so tragic.
When the Japanese engineers designed and built that reactor, they were meticulous. They looked at the historical data. They built the seawalls and the structural supports to withstand the worst, most devastating earthquake and tsunami that had ever been recorded in the history of the region.
Which, to an auditor or a risk manager, sounds completely rational. You plan for the worst historical event. You build a massive buffer based on the data.
Right. But they failed to recognize a glaring philosophical flaw in their logic. What they fail to imagine is that the worst historical earthquake was, at the exact time it occurred in the past, a complete and total surprise with no precedent.
Wow, yes.
The worst past event was once an unprecedented outlier. So, using a past surprise as the ultimate unbreakable ceiling for all future surprises is a catastrophic failure of imagination.
The tsunami that hit Fukushima exceeded the historical maximum because the future is not obligated to respect historical maximums. The ocean doesn't check a spreadsheet before it swells.
The second example the text gives is almost poetic in its tragedy. It goes all the way back to pharaonic Egypt.
Oh, the Nile scribes.
Yes. The scribes and the priests along the Nile River would meticulously track the high water mark of the floods every season. When a massive flood occurred, they would carve the high water mark into the stone walls.
So they had the data.
They had the data. They would then use that specific historical maximum line as their absolute worst-case scenario for planning their agriculture and building their settlements.
It is the exact same fallacy, separated by thousands of years. Assuming the worst event of the past will perfectly match the worst event of the future, accidentally assumes that the history of unprecedented events just stops today.
It assumes the universe has run out of surprises.
It's the end of history illusion applied to geology. We look back and say, wow, history is full of crazy, unpredictable shocks. But surely the biggest shock has already happened.
And the text outlines why that is statistically impossible. It introduces this concept that I can only describe as the 7 out of 15 billion reality. This really broke my brain.
It highlights the role of the extreme outlier and how nonlinear events completely destroy linear models.
Let's walk through the mechanics of this. Picture the timeline of human history. Roughly 15 billion human beings were born in the 19th and 20th centuries combined.
15 billion distinct lives.
Moving around, working, inventing, fighting. But if you were to remove just 7 specific people from that massive demographic ocean, or if just one tiny microscopic event in their lives went differently, the entire modern global economy would be completely unrecognizable today.
Think about the sheer fragility of our current macroeconomic reality. Think about Adolf Hitler.
Right.
If Adolf Hitler's parents had gotten into a petty argument and slept in separate beds on the evening 9 months before he was born,
The entire trajectory of the 20th century changes.
World War II doesn't happen in the same way. The Cold War dynamics shift. The technological accelerations driven by wartime spending don't occur. Trillions of dollars of global wealth are redistributed differently.
The entire map of the world changes because of an argument over dinner. Or think about medical breakthroughs. What if Jonas Salk, who developed the polio vaccine, had just gotten intensely frustrated with his research one afternoon in the lab?
What if he quit?
What if he decided to quit his job as a virologist and go teach high school biology instead? There is no polio vaccine in the 1950s. The demographic and economic ripple effects of millions of paralyzed or dead children would be incalculable.
It would alter global productivity for generations.
Or, to bring it closer to our modern era, consider the morning of September 11th, 2001.
Yeah.
What if an airport security guard had been just a little more observant or a little less tired and confiscated a hijacker's box cutter?
The hijackers get arrested at the gate. The towers don't fall. The U.S. doesn't spend 2 decades and trillions of dollars fighting wars in the Middle East.
The Department of Homeland Security isn't created.
The geopolitical landscape of the entire 21st century is fundamentally altered. You are talking about the course of global power, trillions in economic output, and the trajectory of the modern world entirely altered by a single, unpredictable moment of human attention at an airport metal detector.
The global economy is not a sturdy, predictable machine. It is a Jenga tower balanced on the tip of a needle.
That's a terrifying image, but it's true.
The vast majority of the macroeconomic trends we analyze today are directly tied to a handful of massive, completely unpredictable outlier events. You cannot model the butterfly effect in an Excel spreadsheet.
You cannot look at historical PE ratios and account for a rogue virus or a terrorist attack.
And on top of those unpredictable historical shocks, the actual literal structure of how our money works is incredibly new. We treat the stock market like this ancient, enduring institution, but the mechanics of personal finance are practically in their infancy.
This is a crucial, often overlooked point regarding structural decay. People constantly try to apply the investing rules of the 1970s or 1980s to today's market. But the structural landscape is a completely different universe.
How so?
Let's look at retirement. For generations, the concept of retirement was handled by the pension system, a defined benefit plan.
The golden watch at the end of 30 years.
You worked for a company for 30 years, and they guaranteed you a specific income until you died. The risk and the investment management was entirely on the corporation.
The individual didn't have to know anything about the stock market. You just did your job.
Exactly. But then the structure mutated. The 401k was created. And the fascinating thing is, the 401k wasn't even a grand, meticulously designed government program to build wealth.
Wait, really? What was it?
It was literally a tax loophole discovered by a benefits consultant named Ted Benna in 1978. He realized a specific provision in the tax code allowed employees to defer taxes on income saved for retirement.
It was an accident.
It was a structural accident that fundamentally shifted the burden of retirement from the corporation, the defined benefit, to the individual, the defined contribution.
Wow.
Suddenly, millions of people with no financial education were forced to become amateur portfolio managers. And the 401k is less than 50 years old.
That's crazy when you think about it.
The Roth IRA was created in the late 1990s. The entire ecosystem of how everyday people interact with the stock market is basically an infant.
We're trying to navigate a brand new machine. And even the greatest financial minds recognize this decay of historical relevance. Look at Ben Graham.
Oh, the godfather of value investing.
He was Warren Buffett's mentor. He literally wrote the Bible on the subject, The Intelligent Investor. But Graham didn't just write the book, declare the math solved, and walk away.
No, he was relentlessly pragmatic. With every new edition of The Intelligent Investor that he published over the decades, he actively discarded the mathematical formulas he had championed in the previous edition.
Wait, he threw out his own formulas. Why?
Because he knew that yesterday's rules decay. The market is an adaptive ecosystem. When a mathematical anomaly or a specific formula for finding cheap stocks works, people notice.
Right, they copy it.
They write about it. Other investors fled in to exploit it, and by exploiting it, they destroyed the anomaly. The market adapts to the formula, and the formula stops working.
So it's self-defeating.
Graham understood that the structural machinery of the market is constantly changing.
So if the machinery is constantly changing, and outlier events dictate the entire global economy, using economic forecasting based purely on historical data is literally like driving down a twisting, treacherous mountain highway in the pitch black.
At 90 miles an hour.
At 90 miles an hour, while only looking in the rearview mirror, you are guaranteeing that you will go off a cliff.
It is a terrifying visual, but mathematically, it is completely accurate.
But wait, I have to challenge this premise. If history isn't a map, if we cannot use past data to predict future boundaries, and if the formulas decay, why do we even bother studying finance?
That's the logical question, right?
Yeah, why are we reading books about market history? Should we just burn the history books entirely when we sit down to invest and just guess?
We shouldn't burn the books, but we have to completely change how we read them and what we expect to get out of them. History is totally, fundamentally useless for predicting specific events or specific market boundaries.
You can't predict the next 2008.
You cannot use historical data to say, the market will definitively crash on Tuesday, or the S&P 500 will never drop below this specific price-to-earnings ratio.
Because the next crash will be caused by something unprecedented.
Precisely. But history is incredibly, undeniably useful for studying human behavior under stress. The technology changes, the structural investment vehicles change, the geopolitical borders change.
But the people don't.
But human greed, human fear, human insecurity, the tendency for people to herd together in a blind panic when they feel threatened, those psychological reactions are exactly the same today as they were during the tulip mania in the 1600s, or when the scribes were tracking the Nile.
The biology of panic is static.
Exactly. History teaches us how people react to surprises, not what the next surprise will be. There's a brilliant insight from Daniel Kahneman, the legendary behavioral economist who we've talked about before.
Love Kahneman.
He was at a dinner party in New York, and someone asked him how investors should react when their meticulously crafted economic forecasts turn out to be completely wrong.
Which, happens constantly.
And Kahneman said something so profound. He said, whenever we are surprised by something, even if we admit that we made a mistake, we say, oh, I'll never make that mistake again. But in fact, what you should learn when you make a mistake because you did not anticipate something is that the world is difficult to anticipate.
Oh, man, that is heavy. The correct lesson to learn from a surprise isn't, I will perfectly predict that specific black swan event next time.
Right.
The correct lesson is simply, the world is surprising.
The world is surprising, period. That is the baseline assumption you have to build your life upon.
And that is the perfect transition, because if the world is guaranteed to surprise us, and our historical spreadsheets are completely useless at predicting the future impact, how do we actually survive it?
You need a buffer.
Right, when the metaphorical car hits the massive pothole in the dark, what stops the axle from snapping? We have to build shock absorbers. Which brings us to the mechanics of survival. Let's talk about the casino.
We are moving into the absolute necessity of room for error or the margin of safety.
Let's shift the scene entirely. Let's get out of the academic conference rooms and step onto the neon-soaked, chaotic floor of a Las Vegas casino. We're looking at a blackjack table.
Okay, I can see it.
Now, the text references the mechanics of card counting, specifically pointing to Kevin Lewis, who was a prominent figure in the MIT blackjack team, famously chronicled in the book Bringing Down the House.
And we need to explain the actual mechanics of what card counting is because pop culture makes it look like magic.
Like Rain Man.
Right. It's not magic, it's statistical tracking.
Yeah.
In the most common system, the high-low system, the player assigns a value to every card. Low cards, like 2s through 6s, are assigned a +1 value. High cards, like 10s, face cards, and aces, are assigned a -1.
And the player just keeps a running tally in their head as the cards are dealt.
Exactly. Why do they do this? Because the math of blackjack dictates that the deck of cards that is rich in high cards, mathematically favors the player.
Because you get more blackjacks.
It increases the chance of hitting blackjacks, and it increases the chance of the dealer busting. Conversely, a shoe rich in low cards favors the casino. So when the running tally gets highly positive, the card counter knows that the remaining deck is packed with high cards.
They know the statistical odds have shifted from favoring the casino to slightly favoring them. They have an edge.
But here is the critical part, and the entire lesson for investors. The card counter, no matter how brilliant they are, no matter how perfectly they have tracked, the deck does not possess a crystal ball.
Right. They don't know the exact next card.
They do not know with certainty what the exact next card out of the shoe is going to be.
They can't see the future. They just know the probabilities.
Right. Even when the math dictates that the odds are unequivocally in their favor, say, they have a 55% chance of winning the hand. A professional card counter will never push all their chips into the center of the table. They never bet their whole stack.
Why? If you have a mathematical edge, shouldn't you press it completely?
Because statistical variance exists. Standard deviation is a reality. Even if you have a 55% chance of winning, you still have a 45% chance of losing that specific hand.
That's almost a coin flip.
And if you bet your entire stack of chips and hit that 45% probability, you are wiped out. You are bankrupt. You are physically escorted away from the table.
Game over.
Yeah.
The math doesn't matter if you don't have the chips to play the next hand.
Exactly. You have to survive the short-term variance to experience the long-term mathematical edge. In finance, this concept is known as the margin of safety or room for error.
Ben Graham's favorite concept.
Benjamin Graham wrote extensively about it, but his most potent summary was a single sentence. He said, "The purpose of the margin of safety is to render the forecast unnecessary."
Let that sink in.
Yeah.
To render the forecast unnecessary. It completely neutralizes the entire problem we were just talking about regarding predicting the future. If you accept that your forecast of the future is inevitably going to be wrong because the world is surprising, you build a financial plan with so much structural slack, so much redundancy, and so much excess savings that it doesn't matter if you're wrong. You still survive.
This is where we have to explicitly separate emotional survival from spreadsheet survival. We touched on this with the margin debt, but it deserves a much deeper dive.
Let's do it.
Let's say you build a perfectly reasonable retirement plan that assumes an 8% annual return. But 3 years into the plan, you experience a sudden, brutal 30% market decline. A massive recession hits.
On the spreadsheet, looking at it purely logically, you might be totally fine. You run the Monte Carlo simulations, and the spreadsheet calculates that even with the 30% drop, because of your withdrawal rate, you won't run out of money until you are 95 years old. The math says you survive.
But the spreadsheet doesn't have a nervous system.
It doesn't panic.
The spreadsheet doesn't factor in the biological reality of enduring a 30% drop in your life savings. The spreadsheet doesn't model the physical exhaustion of waking up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, staring at the ceiling.
Or the knot in your stomach.
It doesn't model the feeling of tucking your kids into bed and wondering, with pure panic, if the decisions you made just destroyed their ability to go to college.
The psychological threshold for pain is almost always lower than the mathematical threshold for ruin. Having a gap between what you can mathematically endure and what you can emotionally endure is a wildly overlooked component of room for error.
It's everything.
If you build a plan that mathematically survives a crash, but emotionally causes you to panic sell at the bottom, your margin of safety was zero.
It's the difference between navigating a war in a flight simulator and being in a live firefight. And the text identifies the ultimate enemy of this survival, the Russian roulette syndrome, or, more formally, extreme optimism bias.
Nassim Taleb talks about this brilliantly. He says, you can be risk-loving and yet completely averse to ruin. Let's look at the mechanics of Russian roulette to understand why.
It's the perfect grim analogy. You put one bullet in a six-shooter, you spin the cylinder, you put the gun to your head, and you pull the trigger.
From a purely statistical mathematical standpoint,
Yep.
the odds are phenomenally in your favor. You have 5 empty chambers, you have an 83% chance of winning the game, you have a massive statistical edge.
But the 17% downside is total, irreversible, permanent ruin. Therefore, it is never worth playing. No amount of upside, even if someone offered you $1 billion to pull the trigger, compensates for the risk of a zero, because a zero means you can never play another game.
And in personal finance, we must loudly, unequivocally condemn the exact equivalent of that bullet in the chamber. Leverage. Debt.
Leverage is the absolute devil.
It is the devil because it takes routine, totally normal market risks, the standard fluctuations of the economy, and turns them into unrecoverable ruin.
Taking on heavy debt to invest or to buy a massive house assumes that the good times will continue flawlessly. It completely masks the odds of ruin.
Look at the mechanics of the 2008 housing crisis. Let's say national housing prices dropped 30%. If you owned your home outright, no mortgage, or a very small manageable mortgage, that 30% drop hurt on paper.
Your net worth went down.
But fundamentally, nothing changed about your daily life. You still had a roof over your head. You still had a place to live. You could just sit in your house, wait a decade, and let the market recover. You could survive the variance.
But what if you were highly leveraged? What if you bought that house with zero down using an adjustable rate mortgage, banking on the price going up so you could refinance?
A double wipeout.
Exactly. When the value dropped 30%, you were underwater. You owed more than the house was worth. Then the recession hit your job, you couldn't make the massive leveraged payment, and you didn't just lose paper money, you lost the physical asset.
You were foreclosed on.
You were evicted, left broke, and completely erased from the game. And the tragedy is, when the housing market inevitably recovered to all-time highs years later, you had zero capital to participate in the upside.
Leverage ensures that when you fall, you don't just bruise your knee, you break your neck. It's what destroyed Lehman Brothers. A massive historic institution wiped off the face of the earth because they were leveraged 30-1.
They had absolutely no margin of safety to survive even a tiny statistical variance in the mortgage market.
So the survival mechanism to combat this is what the text calls the barbell personality. It is a deliberate dual mindset. On one end of the barbell, you have to be deeply, fundamentally paranoid about the short term.
You have to be terrified of the metaphorical bullet.
Right. You have to hoard cash, avoid bad debt, and assume the next year could be an economic disaster.
But on the other end of the barbell,
you combine that paranoia with intense long-term optimism. You believe that over a 30-year period, human innovation, compounding, and market growth will trend upward.
the paranoia in the short term generates the cash and the emotional stability required to survive the panics, so that your investments can ride the decades-long wave of human progress.
Okay, I have to interrupt because I am putting myself in the shoes of someone listening to this, and this sounds incredibly contradictory.
I get that.
Are you telling me if I want this massive margin of safety, I should just be incredibly conservative? Should I liquidate my index funds, hide my cash under a mattress, and just accept terrible inflation-losing returns for the rest of my life because I'm terrified of a black swan?
That is the natural reaction when people learn about extreme risk, but it's a complete misunderstanding of the concept. We have to clarify the profound mechanical difference between being conservative and having a margin of safety.
Break that down.
Being conservative means avoiding risk entirely. Putting all your money under a mattress is avoiding market volatility, yes, but it is guaranteeing a slow death by inflation. It guarantees you will not build wealth.
So what's a margin of safety?
A margin of safety, on the other hand, is about raising the odds of success at a given level of risk. It's about engineering your life to increase your chances of survival while still playing the high return game of equities.
Give me a tangible mathematical example of how someone actually implements this. How does the author of the text engineer a margin of safety?
The author gives a very practical, transparent look at his own portfolio planning. Historically, the U.S. stock market returns about 6.8% annually after inflation. That is the historical average over the long run.
Right.
Now, a completely rational, spreadsheet-driven planner would project their future wealth using that exact 6.8% number. They would build their retirement model assuming the future matches the past perfectly.
But the author doesn't do that.
No. Prioritizing a margin of safety, he deliberately assumes his future returns will be one-third lower than the historical average. He intentionally models his future with pessimistic numbers.
Why? What does sandbagging your own projections actually accomplish?
It forces behavioral change today. By assuming his investments will only grow at, say, 4.5% instead of 6.8%, the math forces him to save a much, much larger percentage of his current income to hit his retirement goal. He has to save heavier today.
I see.
Now look at how this plays out. If the future turns out to be terrible, if the economy stagnates for 2 decades, his heavy saving habit ensures he still hits his goals. He survives the bad luck.
But what if the future perfectly resembles the historical average? What if the market does return 6.8%?
Then he is pleasantly surprised with massive, life-changing surplus wealth. As Charlie Munger brilliantly said, the best way to achieve felicity is to aim low.
He structurally guarantees his own happiness. He guarantees felicity. I absolutely love that.
Right.
And it's not just about retirement returns. He talks about how he doesn't just save for specific named items. Most people save for a down payment on a house or save for a new car.
The big ticket items.
Right. But the author saves heavily for what we talked about in previous episodes. He saves for the field mice.
The invisible catastrophes.
Exactly. It's the tiny, unpredictable disasters that gnaw at your financial foundation. It's the sudden medical emergency, the unexpected job loss, the boiler dying in the dead of winter. By stockpiling unallocated cash with no specific purpose other than to absorb shock, he builds an impregnable moat around his long-term investments.
So when the boiler dies, he pays for it with cash instead of having to sell his compounding stock portfolio in a panic. He embraces the unknown rather than trying to calculate it.
And that brings us to the ultimate mind-bending complication of this entire deep dive. We've established that the external world is unpredictable. We have established that history is a flawed map and we need a margin of safety to survive.
Right?
But what if the most volatile, the most unpredictable, the most completely chaotic variable in your entire 30-year financial plan isn't the stock market? What if the most dangerous variable is you?
We are entering the territory of how you will inevitably change. And I want to set the stage with a visceral story. I think almost everyone knows someone who fits this exact profile.
Okay, lay it on us.
Picture a kid. He is fiercely driven. From the age of 12, all he wants to do in the entire world is become a doctor. He bases his entire identity around this goal.
It is his singular focus.
He grinds through high school, taking every AP science class. He gives up his weekends in his 20s to live in the university library. He survives the grueling, sleep-deprived torture of medical school and residency.
Takes on $300,000 in student loan debt.
He sacrifices relationships, hobbies, and sleep. And finally, after a decade of relentless effort, he reaches the mountaintop. He is an attending physician. Fast forward 15 years. You run into him at a coffee shop, you ask him how the dream is going, and he looks at you with completely dead eyes and says,
Awful career, man. Awful career.
It is devastating. A decade of relentless sacrifice, driven by a singular, unyielding vision, and the destination turns out to be a psychological prison. The person he became hates the life that the younger version of him built.
Why does this happen so frequently? Why are we so bad at predicting what will make us happy?
It happens because of a profound cognitive blind spot identified by the Harvard psychologist Dan Gilbert. He calls it the end of history illusion. And it is a spectacular, universal glitch in the human operating system.
Explain the mechanics of the glitch. Why does our brain do this to us?
To understand the illusion, you have to look at how the brain processes memory versus imagination. Gilbert points out that all of us are keenly aware of how much we have changed in the past.
Oh, totally.
If you look back at who you were 10 years ago, the clothes you wore, the absolute certainty of the opinions you held, the people you chose to date, you probably cringe. You laugh at how naive or wildly different you were. You easily recognize that your past self was a massive work in progress.
I wouldn't let the 20-year-old version of me make a decision about what to eat for lunch, let alone manage a 30-year retirement portfolio.
Exactly. We acknowledge our past evolution because remembering the past is a low-effort cognitive task. The data is already stored. But the illusion occurs when we try to look forward. We walk around believing that our current self, the exact person we are right at this very second, is the final, finished product.
Like we're finally done growing.
We believe our personal history has just come to an end today. We think, sure, I changed a lot in the past, but now, finally, I have it all figured out. My desires today are my permanent desires for the rest of my life.
We literally think we've downloaded the final software update for our personalities. It's crazy. And why does the brain do that?
Because imagining the future requires a massive amount of cognitive load. It requires synthesizing variables that do not exist yet. It is exhausting for the brain to try and compute how your values will shift over 20 years. So, to save energy, the brain takes a shortcut.
It just copies and pastes.
It just takes your current state, copies it, and pastes it across the next 30 years. It defaults to the lazy assumption that your current identity is permanent.
And Gilbert's research shows this happens across the entire human lifespan. It's not just dumb teenagers. People from 18 to 68 consistently underestimate how much their personalities, values, and goals will change in the next decade.
Young people pay thousands of dollars to get full-sleeve tattoos because they are certain they will love them forever. And 10 years later, they pay thousands of dollars in agonizing laser treatments to get those exact same tattoos removed.
Young adults rush into marriages with explosive passion, convinced they have found perfection, and middle-aged adults rush to divorce attorneys to escape those exact same people.
We are constantly, exhaustingly undoing the grand plans of our former selves. And if we connect this biological reality to the bigger picture of money, it presents a catastrophic fundamental problem for compounding.
A massive problem. Because think about Charlie Munger's first rule of compounding. Never interrupt it unnecessarily. Compounding requires decades of uninterrupted, patient holding. It requires leaving the money alone. But how on earth are you supposed to avoid interrupting a 30-year financial plan when your actual desires for your life, your core values, your geography, your career ambitions, whether you want a family or want to live in a van, are virtually guaranteed to completely change every 10 years?
It creates a severe structural tension. You are trying to build a rigid, static bridge over a river that is constantly changing direction. If your plan is too tight, it snaps when your personality shifts. The source text offers two profound, practical solutions to navigate this illusion.
Let's look at the mechanics of these solutions.
The first solution is to aggressively avoid the extreme ends of financial planning. When we are possessed by a singular vision of the future, like the kid who wanted to be a doctor, we tend to adopt extreme, punishing lifestyles to achieve it as fast as possible.
We go all in.
We embrace hyperfrugality, living on rice and beans in a tiny, miserable apartment so we can hit a FIRE number, financial independence, retire early by age 30. Or, conversely, we adopt the absolute grind set. We sign up for the 80-hour work week, grinding ourselves into physical dust, abandoning our families to buy the massive mansion and the fleet of sports cars.
We think the extreme sacrifice is justified by the permanent happiness of the destination.
Right. But the end of history illusion tells us that the fuel driving those extremes will inevitably evaporate. Humans are adaptation machines. We experience hedonic adaptation.
We get used to things so fast.
You adapt to the thrill of the Ferrari, and within 6 months, it just becomes a piece of metal sitting in the driveway.
Yeah.
You adapt to the simplicity of the tiny apartment, and suddenly it just feels claustrophobic and depressing. The thrill of the goal wears off, but the consequences of the extreme plan, the physical exhaustion, the missed experiences in your 20s, the isolation from your friends, those become enduring, painful regrets.
If you burn your 20s and 30s working 90 hours a week on Wall Street to hit a specific net worth number, and then at 40 your brain goes through a value shift and you realize you actually value time with your kids more than a high score in your bank account, you have a massive agonizing regret. You abandon your youth for a goal you no longer care about.
And then the text says what usually happens is you panic. You abandon the old plan entirely, you try to sprint in the opposite direction to make up for lost time, you buy the boat, you quit the job, and you destroy your compounding progress.
Extremes breed snapbacks. By aiming for a balanced, moderate path saving consistently, but allowing for reasonable enjoyment and slack today, you protect yourself against the inevitability of changing your mind. You build a life that is sustainable across multiple versions of yourself.
Which brings us to the second solution, and this is the hardest one to actually execute. You have to explicitly accept the reality of changing your mind. You have to build mutability into your financial model, which requires defeating the final boss of bad financial psychology, the sunk cost fallacy.
Sunk costs are the devil of human evolution. Daniel Kahneman, who we mentioned earlier, famously said, "I have no sunk costs." He considered it his greatest cognitive superpower.
I use an analogy for sunk costs all the time that I think perfectly captures the absurdity of it.
Ooh, let's hear it.
It's like buying a pair of incredibly expensive designer shoes. You drop $800 on them, but you get them home, you wear them out once, and you realize they are 2 sizes too small. They are absolute agony to wear.
They pinch your toes, they make your feet bleed.
But because you spent $800 and you cannot return them, you force yourself to keep wearing them. You are literally giving yourself bloody blisters today, walking in physical pain, simply to justify money that left your bank account a year ago.
That is the perfect, visceral visualization of the glitch. Sunk costs are the act of anchoring your current decisions to past efforts, past time, or past money that cannot be refunded. It is irrational because the money is already gone.
Wearing the shoes doesn't bring the $800 back.
Exactly. It just adds physical pain to the financial loss. But our brains hate admitting waste. When you fall victim to sunk costs, you make your future self a prisoner to your past self.
You stay in the miserable medical career because you spent 6 years in medical school and took on the debt. You hold on to the plummeting, terrible stock because you bought it at a higher price, and you refuse to sell until you break even. You are letting a stranger, the naive, younger version of yourself who made the initial flawed decision, dictate the terms of your life today.
But Kahneman just walks away. He throws the painful shoes in the trash. He treats every single day as a blank slate. He looks at his portfolio or his research and asks, "Knowing what I know today, would I enter this position?" If the answer is no, he abandons it immediately, without a shred of guilt over the past cost.
But wait, this raises a huge, paralyzing question. If I have to accept the biological reality that I am going to be a totally different person in 10 years, and if I have to be willing to ruthlessly abandon my sunk costs and throw out my old plans, how can anyone possibly set a 20-year retirement goal today without feeling completely paralyzed?
How do you aim an arrow if you know the target's going to move 5 times before it lands?
You solve that paralysis by fundamentally changing what you were planning for. The goal of the end of history illusion isn't to convince you to stop planning. The goal is to convince you to plan for maximum flexibility.
So not a specific number or object.
Instead of saving for a highly specific, rigid, materialistic goal like saying, I am saving exactly $1.2 million to buy a 5,000 square foot house in this specific zip code, or I am retiring precisely at age 55 to buy a catamaran, you change the objective. You prioritize saving for autonomy. You save for options.
You save to buy the freedom to change your mind.
Exactly. Wealth isn't just purchasing power. Wealth is time. Wealth is a shield against forced labor. Wealth is the ability to wake up in a decade, realize that you completely hate your career, and have the financial runway to quit, retrain, and pivot gracefully without destroying your family's life or interrupting your compound interest.
If you aren't rigidly anchored to a specific material identity, your financial plan can absorb the shock waves of your evolving personality.
Exactly.
And this leads us to the final critical piece of this entire section, Chapter 15 of the source material. We've talked about building this flexible plan, letting go of sunk costs, and surviving the chaos. But there is one last psychological hurdle you have to clear if you actually want those compounding returns.
Ah, yes, the concept of nothing's free.
Nothing's free. The fundamental truth that the market demands a price of admission.
And the problem is people look at the stock market and they see the historical returns, that's 6.8% we talked about, and they think it's a free lunch. They think the reward just comes to them for existing.
Because the price tag isn't visible. When you buy a car, the price tag is literally a sticker on the window, $30,000. You know exactly what you have to pay to get the car.
Yeah.
But the stock market doesn't ask for your cash up front as a fee.
The price of admission to the stock market is paid in a completely different currency. It is paid in volatility, fear, doubt, uncertainty, and regret.
That's the price.
That's the fee. When your portfolio drops 20% and you are terrified that you've ruined your future, that terror is the bill coming due. You are paying the fee for the long-term returns.
But because it feels so awful, people don't view volatility as a fee. They view it as a fine, like a penalty for doing something wrong.
That's the core distinction the author makes. A fine means you broke the law. If you get a speeding ticket, the fine is telling you, don't do that again. So when investors experience a massive market drop, their brain interprets it as a fine. I must have done something wrong. I need to get out. I need to stop investing.
But it's not a fine. It's a fee. It's the price of a ticket to Disneyland. When you pay $100 to get into Disneyland, you don't feel like you've been fined for making a mistake. You just paid the fee to ride the roller coasters.
Exactly.
Market volatility is just the fee you pay for the long-term magic of compounding. But people spend their entire lives trying to sneak into Disneyland without paying the ticket.
They try to dodge the dips, they day trade, they try to pull their money out right before a crash and jump back in right before a rally. They are basically trying to steal the returns.
And what happens to people who try to steal the returns? They get crushed. They miss the best days of the market, they trigger massive tax events, and they underperform the people who just sat there, took the pain, and paid the fee.
You have to accept the fee. Once you realize that the fear and the uncertainty are just the cost of admission, it changes your entire relationship with your money. You stop panicking when the market drops because you look at it and say, okay, here's the bill, I'm willing to pay it.
That is incredible. Okay, let's pull all of these massive threads together because we have covered an immense expanse of psychological terrain today.
A literal dopaminergic sprint.
We started the 19th century asylums, injecting malaria to cure syphilis, to prove that rational math often fails the test of human endurance. We looked at the fragility of history, realizing that outlier events dictate everything, and past performance is a terrible guide.
We walked onto the casino floor to learn why even card counters need a margin of safety.
We tackled the cognitive illusions of our future selves, realizing that we are constantly changing and that sunk costs are a trap. And finally, we realized that volatility is not a fine, it's just the fee we have to pay. What does this all fundamentally mean for the person listening right now, looking at their own bank account?
It means that the ultimate financial superpower is not math. It is not being able to calculate discounted cash flows or perfectly allocate a portfolio on a spreadsheet or predict the macroeconomic trends of the next decade.
So what is it?
The ultimate financial superpower is self-awareness.
Radical, uncompromising self-awareness. It's looking in the mirror and giving yourself the grace to be a reasonable, flawed, emotional human being instead of trying to act like a cold, rational calculator.
It's recognizing that the world is a chaotic, mutating machine that is guaranteed to shock you with unprecedented events, and deciding to build an impregnable moat of safety, a massive room for error around your life so that the surprises don't destroy you.
And, perhaps most profoundly, it's about forgiving yourself when your dreams inevitably change. It's having the courage to abandon your sunk costs, to throw away the painful shoes, and to build a financial life optimized for flexibility and autonomy rather than rigid, brittle certainty.
And willingly paying the fee of volatility to get there.
As we wrap up this fast-paced look into the human mind, I want to leave you with a final lingering idea to mull over. Something to take with you on your commute or your walk or while you're doing the dishes. Think about the end of history illusion.
A powerful concept.
If we know, biologically and unequivocally, that the illusion is real, that you are practically guaranteed to be a completely different person with entirely different desires and values. In a decade, what is the one financial obligation or the one career goal that you are chained to right now that was actually decided by a stranger?
What is the burden you are carrying for a version of yourself that no longer exists?
Exactly. What is the $800 pair of tight shoes you are still wearing, enduring the blisters, simply to satisfy the younger, naive version of yourself? Think about it. Are you living your current life, or are you living the life of a ghost? We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the messy, beautiful, completely irrational reality of the psychology of money. But do not go anywhere. We are teeing up the final part of our deep dive, and it is going to be explosive. We are plunging headfirst into the devastating, world-altering psychology of financial bubbles, and we are going to dissect the incredibly seductive intellectual allure of pessimism. Why does the guy predicting the end of the world always sound so much smarter than the guy predicting progress?
It's going to challenge everything you think about market forecasting and the media you consume.
You won't want to miss it. Until then, stay reasonable, leave massive room for the surprises, and we'll see you on the next deep dive. You know, usually when we picture a massive financial crash, our brains just automatically default to this imagery of a natural disaster.
Right, like a hurricane or something.
Exactly like a hurricane. You see these dark macroeconomic clouds rolling in on the news, and the wind of inflation picks up.
Yeah.
And the storm just sweeps through, right? Just indiscriminately tearing down the portfolios of all these innocent bystanders.
I mean, it makes sense why we do that. Framing it that way, it feels like an act of God.
Totally.
It feels like this violent weather system that just simply crossed our path, like it's something entirely outside of our control.
Which is deeply comforting. Right.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very comforting way to view the world because it completely absolves us of any responsibility.
Right, because if a hurricane destroys your house, no one questions your architectural skill.
Exactly. You're just a victim of circumstance. But the moment you step out of classical economics and cross the border into behavioral finance,
Which is a wild place to be.
it really is, because you start sifting through the wreckage of those collapsed markets, and that whole weather metaphor it completely disintegrates.
Because you look at the blueprints of the economy, and you realize the people suffering in the storm actually built the hurricane themselves.
Yeah, they summoned it with their own minds.
It is the ultimate self-inflicted catastrophe.
Right. We are not just the victims of the financial weather. We are the weather.
I love that.
I mean, the collective psychological state of, millions of people making these highly emotional decisions on a daily basis, that is what generates the barometric pressure of the global economy.
Well, welcome to the grand finale of our 4-part deep dive into Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money.
The grand finale. Here we are.
Here we are. And over the course of this journey, we have systematically dismantled all those traditional spreadsheet-driven illusions surrounding wealth and luck and greed.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. But this conversation today, this is the dopaminergic sprint.
Oh, I like that.
Right. We are leaving the theory behind. We are stepping into a high-velocity, intellectual, final boss fight to master your own financial psychology.
We are synthesizing the final chapters of this source material to forge basically the ultimate psychological armor.
Exactly. We are going to deconstruct the hidden mechanics of financial bubbles, decode that irresistible, gravitational pull of doom that hijacks our nervous system.
That doom scrolling effect, yeah.
Yes, the doom. And we're going to map out the reality distortion field of the stories we tell ourselves.
And to truly understand why we fall for all of it, we're actually going to end with a time-traveling autopsy of the American consumer.
Which is just fascinating.
It is. We're looking at the exact historical matrix that programmed the way we view the concept of enough.
Right. But before we get into all that, I want to set a quick ground rule. We are going to be touching on the history of the U.S. economy, right?
Yeah, looking at specific presidential eras and economic booms.
Right, including the Reagan era. And our mission here is purely to observe the historical facts presented in the source material.
Absolutely. No taking political sides here from either the left or the right.
Exactly. We are just impartially reporting on the content provided to convey the ideas in the book. So I want to speak directly to you, the listener, right from the jump.
This is not a theoretical lecture.
No, it is not. We are handing you the master blueprint today. So let's jump right into the fire with the sheer visceral devastation of financial bubbles.
The numbers in the source material for this they are astronomically large.
I mean, the human brain almost rejects them.
It really does. So let's rewind to the implosion of the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s. That single event vaporized $6.2 trillion in household wealth.
6.2 trillion.
Trillion with a T.
Yeah.
And then, just a few years later, the housing market collapsed and incinerated over $8 trillion.
Wow. And when we say incinerated, we really have to ground that in physical reality.
Right. It's not just numbers on a screen.
No, it is not just a red downward arrow on a Bloomberg terminal. That represents thousands of college funds just vanishing overnight.
It means a whole generation of workers delaying their retirement by a decade.
Marriages buckling under the psychological and physical stress of foreclosure. I mean, these bubbles, they are mass casualty events on a societal scale.
They absolutely are. So the obvious question you have to ask is, well, why do we keep doing this?
Right. We all watched the dot-com wreckage smoke, and then literally 5 years later, we marched the global economy right off an even steeper cliff with real estate.
It's wild. And the conventional narrative is incredibly lazy,
Oh, totally. You turn on the television and the pundits just shrug and say, well, Wall Street is greedy. Human nature is fundamentally greedy.
Yeah, but the source material aggressively pushes back on that diagnosis.
Which I think is so important.
It is, because blaming a multi-trillion-dollar collapse entirely on pure cartoonish grade, it just misses the fundamental mechanics of what is actually happening in the market.
So, to understand bubbles, we really have to return to that core premise we established in the beginning of this deep dive.
Right. No one is crazy.
No one is crazy. People make financial decisions that look completely irrational in hindsight.
Yeah, but in the specific moment, they made them based on the specific information they had. Those decisions actually made complete logical sense.
Okay, so if it isn't just pure greed driving the madness, what is this invisible force inflating these massive bubbles?
It is what the book calls a multiplayer collision.
A multiplayer collision.
Yeah. Bubbles inflate and ultimately burst because millions of people are playing fundamentally different games on the exact same field.
But they're completely blind to that fact, right?
Exactly. We treat the market as this single unified entity, but it isn't.
Right.
It is a wildly diverse ecosystem populated by completely different species of investors.
Give me some examples of those species.
Well, you have the day trader, right? They measure their time horizon in minutes. Then you have the momentum fund manager looking strictly at the next fiscal quarter. You have the index investor looking at a 10-year horizon.
And then you've got, like, the elderly retiree living off dividend yield whose horizon is measured in decades.
Exactly. But they are all looking at the exact same asset. Let's say a tech stock like Yahoo in 1999 or, a condominium in Miami in 2005.
But they are analyzing it through completely different psychological lenses.
Right. Let's actually drill into the mechanics of Yahoo in 1999.
Let's do it.
So when that stock was surging by 20% in a single afternoon, the day trader buying it wasn't irrational.
Because the day trader doesn't care about Yahoo's price-to-earnings ratio.
Not at all. Or their 10-year strategic roadmap. They're buying the stock simply because they see momentum on their screen.
Right, and they know they can sell it to another momentum trader 3 hours later for a profit.
Exactly. For the specific short-term game they're playing, ignoring the underlying business fundamentals is actually the correct strategy.
It works flawlessly for them.
Right, until the drug of rising prices starts to leak out into the rest of the ecosystem.
And that infects the other species.
Yes, because rising prices are the most potent reality distortion field in existence.
So true.
When prices go parabolic, the long-term, value-conscious investor, the person who is supposedly playing a completely different game, has to sit there and watch the day trader make an absolute fortune.
And the psychological pressure of that just becomes unbearable.
It really does. That value investor begins taking cues from the momentum trader.
Right, so they abandon their own rigorous 30-year strategy and start mimicking the erratic behavior of someone playing a 30-minute game.
Completely forgetting that their end goals are entirely incompatible.
It's like we're out on a field together, and I'm playing basketball. I'm carefully dribbling down the court, adhering to my specific set of rules, and suddenly...
a guy in cleats completely tackles you into the dirt.
Yes. And I'm furious, I'm screaming that he's cheating and violating the rules of the game.
But he isn't cheating, he's just playing full contact rugby.
And I am the one who failed to recognize that I wandered onto a multi-sport field wearing a basketball jersey.
That is the perfect analogy. And the violence of that collision is what causes bubbles to burst.
Wow.
The source material uses the metaphor of two investors who don't even know each other exists. They are invisible to one another's internal motives.
So when the day trader decides the momentum has stopped and aggressively sells, the price drops.
Right. And the value investor, who is blindly piggybacking on the day trader's momentum without actually understanding it.
They suddenly find themselves holding a violently depreciating asset with no underlying value to support it.
Exactly. They get wiped out because they played someone else's game.
Which makes the entire financial media apparatus incredibly dangerous, if you think about it.
Oh, it borders on financial malpractice.
Right. When a charismatic commentator on a financial network looks directly into the camera and screams that you absolutely must buy a specific stock today, that advice is functionally useless, isn't it?
Completely useless, because that commentator has absolutely no idea who is sitting on the other side of the screen.
Right. They don't know if you are a 22-year-old with massive risk tolerance trading on a smartphone app.
Or a 68-year-old widow trying to protect a fragile pension.
Exactly. To broadcast that one specific asset at one specific price is the universally correct move for both of those individuals. It's absurd.
It is. So the armor we are forging for you, the listener, starts right here. You must explicitly define your specific game.
And it cannot just be a vague idea in your head, right? You have to articulate it.
You really do. Housel actually provides his own definition in the text.
Oh, I love this quote. He states, "I am a passive investor, optimistic in the world's ability to generate real economic growth, and I'm confident that over the next 30 years, that growth will accrue to my investments."
That right there is a masterclass in psychological boundary setting.
It really is.
It operates as a highly effective behavioral filter. Because once your identity is rooted in a 30-year passive horizon, the chaotic noise of the market just loses its power over you.
Right. A teenager making millions on a volatile cryptocurrency doesn't trigger your jealousy.
Nope. And a sudden 10% drop in the market doesn't trigger your panic.
Because you fundamentally understand they are playing rugby and you are playing chess.
Exactly.
But, defining your game doesn't prevent the rugby players from colliding and tearing up the field around you.
That's true. You still have to live through the crashes.
Right. When the multiplayer collisions inevitably happen and a bubble bursts, the sheer devastation leaves this massive psychological vacuum in the public consciousness.
Yeah.
And that vulnerability leaves your brain completely wide open to the next psychological trap, which is the irresistible gravitational pull of doom.
The gravity of doom. The source material calls it the seduction of pessimism.
The seduction.
And seduction is the clinically accurate word here. Because pessimism does not just feel common, it feels intellectually superior.
It really does. There is a profound asymmetry in how the human brain processes financial narrative.
Oh, huge asymmetry. If an analyst goes on television and predicts that global markets will steadily grow by 8% a year for the next decade,
the audience dismisses them as naive.
Right. They sound like a salesperson trying to pitch a product. Optimism is basically coded in our brains as a sales tactic.
But if a different analyst goes on that exact same program, lowers their voice, and predicts a catastrophic systemic collapse is coming in 6 months, that will wipe out the middle class.
They're instantly hailed as a visionary truth teller.
Instantly. They will be invited back tomorrow. They will sell millions of books. Their clips will go viral.
Because pessimism sounds like a warning from a friend trying to save your life.
I understand the contrast, but let's dig into the actual mechanics of it. Why are we so deeply biologically wired to revere the doomsayer and just roll our eyes at the optimist?
Well, it requires a trip into evolutionary psychology.
Okay, let's go.
The book leans on the work of Daniel Kahneman, who mapped out how the human brain evolved to process information.
Right, Kahneman is brilliant.
He is. And simply put, organisms that treat threats as far more urgent than opportunities have a fundamentally higher probability of surviving and reproducing.
We are the descendants of the anxious cavemen.
Exactly. We have asymmetric aversion to loss.
Okay, I hear the caveman argument all the time, but let me push back on that a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
The rustling bush in the prehistoric savanna, that is an immediate physical threat to life and limb, right?
Yes.
But a 3% dip in the S&P 500 is abstract mathematics happening on computer servers in New Jersey.
Right, it's not a tiger.
Exactly. Why does the modern human brain treat abstract financial data with the exact same panic reflex as a physical predator?
Because the brain translates financial ruin into a survival threat through the mechanism of systemic interconnection.
Systemic interconnection.
Yeah. Think about it like this. If a meteorologist predicts a massive hurricane is going to hit Miami tomorrow, and you live in Seattle,
I might feel deep empathy for the people in Florida.
but your central nervous system doesn't trigger a fight or flight response. Your personal survival isn't compromised.
Right.
But money does not operate like the weather. Money is a global circulatory system.
Meaning a localized financial crisis can actually travel through the system and hit my personal bank account.
Exactly. If a sector of the economy collapses, your neighbor loses their job.
Right.
Because they lost their job, they stop spending money at the local businesses in your town.
And then those local businesses default on their commercial loans.
Yes. The regional banks holding those loans suddenly restrict credit, which means the company you work for can no longer secure the funding they need for payroll.
And suddenly you are laid off.
Exactly. A recession is an invisible weather system that basically blankets the entire globe simultaneously.
Wow. The source material quotes the legendary economist Joseph Schumpeter describing the psychological atmosphere of the Great Depression.
Oh, that's a great quote.
Yeah, he didn't use economic jargon. He just said people felt that the ground under their feet was giving way.
That is a visceral, terrifying sensation of falling.
It really is.
And that sensation is amplified by the sheer speed differential between financial growth and financial destruction.
Let's talk about that speed differential.
Well, growth is driven by the mathematical force of compounding, and compounding takes decades.
It is excruciatingly slow.
It is completely invisible on a daily basis. You do not wake up on a Tuesday and visibly notice that the global supply chain has become 0.01% more efficient.
Right. It is like trying to watch a forest grow in real time.
But destruction is cinematic.
Oh, it is. Destruction is an explosive, overnight event.
Yeah. A blue chip company can spend 75 years carefully building a sterling reputation, and it takes one 30-second news cycle about an accounting scandal to completely bankrupt them.
The stock market takes the stairs up for 10 years, and it takes the elevator down in 5 days.
Exactly. And because destruction happens in the blink of an eye, our amygdala naturally locks onto it. We cannot look away from the sudden violence of a crash.
Which creates this constant hypervigilance, right? This chronic state of poorly managed expectations. You're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Right. And the book introduces a phenomenal anecdote about the theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking to illustrate the antidote to this.
I loved this part.
Yeah, so Hawking was diagnosed with a brutal motor neuron disease at age 21. It left him paralyzed and eventually unable to speak.
Just a devastating diagnosis.
But decades later, a reporter asked him how he managed to maintain such a cheerful disposition through all of it.
And Hawking replied that his expectations were reduced to 0 when he was 21. Everything since then has been a bonus.
Expecting nothing makes everything a bonus.
That is powerful.
Now, applying that to financial psychology doesn't mean you should be a blind, bubbly optimist who ignores legitimate risks.
Right, you still have to be realistic.
It just means you have to recognize that when you consume financial news, your biological hardware is actively working against your long-term interests.
So when you feel that seduction of pessimism pulling you into a panic, you have to mentally categorize it as a prehistoric reflex.
Yes, it is not an accurate mathematical forecast of the future.
But here is the critical pivot, I think. When our caveman brains are flooded with that panic, they don't just sit there in passive fear.
No, they don't.
The human brain abhors a vacuum of information. It desperately needs to make sense of the chaos.
And to do that, it begins inventing narratives.
Exactly. Which transitions us directly into the reality distortion field of the stories we tell ourselves.
Chapter 18.
Yes. The premise here is that stories, not complex spreadsheets, are the true fuel and the true brakes of the global economy.
Because we have this desperate desire for finance to be a hard science.
We really do. We want it to operate like astrophysics.
Right. Think about a NASA mission launching a probe to Pluto. The engineers sit in a room and calculate the exact mathematical trajectory.
They factor in the gravitational slingshots of other planets.
And they know the precise moment of arrival down to the millisecond. It is a universe driven by unyielding, exact math.
And we desperately want our retirement accounts to function with that level of clinical certainty.
Because if it's math, it's controllable.
But finance is completely devoid of that certainty.
Right. Astrophysics is clean because a deep space probe doesn't get greedy halfway to Mars.
That is such a good point.
The probe doesn't read a terrifying headline and panic sell its thrusters at the bottom of a market dip.
No, it does not.
Finance is a soft discipline entirely driven by messy, highly emotional, unpredictable human behavior.
And human behavior is navigated through the stories we tell ourselves.
The source material breaks down 2 terrifying rules for how these stories distort our reality.
Let's go through them. Rule number 1. The more desperately you want a specific outcome to be true, the more likely you are to blindly believe a narrative that wildly overestimates the odds of that outcome.
And the ultimate crucible for this rule is the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme.
Madoff.
He is the perfect psychological case study. Look at it purely through the lens of hindsight. Today, people review the mechanics of his scheme and ask, how could anyone be so incredibly stupid?
Right, because his investment returns almost never varied, which is mathematically impossible in a volatile market.
Exactly. He used a tiny, completely unknown storefront accounting firm to audit billions of dollars.
He vehemently refused to provide transparency to his clients.
The red flags weren't just waving, they were on fire.
Literally on fire.
Right.
Yet, he successfully raised billions of dollars from some of the most sophisticated, highly educated institutional investors on the planet.
Right.
Now, this is where I have to pause and challenge the premise a bit. I understand that retail investors, average people, might fall for a charismatic story. But we are talking about institutional fund managers here,
Yeah.
These people have teams of forensic accountants, risk analysts, and PhDs in mathematics. Are you seriously telling me that a good story completely overrides a PhD staring at a deeply flawed spreadsheet?
That is exactly the terrifying reality the book exposes. Yes.
Wow.
Because the PhD in mathematics is still a human being. And that human being answers to a board of directors who are demanding high risk-free returns in a terrifying, chaotic market.
So the story Madoff told them wasn't just a pitch.
No, it was an emotional anesthetic. He looked at terrified institutions and essentially said, I can provide you with consistent, non-varying returns. I have conquered the chaos.
He offered them astrophysics in a world of behavioral finance.
Precisely. If you are an institutional investor terrified of losing your client's money to market volatility, and an incredibly confident, authoritative figure hands you a piece of paper that says he has eliminated risk.
You actively choose not to look too closely at the underlying math.
Exactly. The overwhelming desire for the story to be true completely anesthetizes the analytical brain. You buy the narrative because the narrative is the exact medicine your anxiety requires.
That is just wild.
Yeah.
Which feeds directly into rule number 2.
Right.
We all possess a highly incomplete view of the world, but our brains refuse to accept that incompletion, so we form a complete, flawless narrative to fill in the gaps.
And Housel uses a brilliant analogy involving his own one-year-old daughter to explain this.
Oh, I loved this part.
It's a beautifully illuminating example. So Housel's daughter is 1 year old. Her understanding of the global macroeconomic system is absolute zero.
Zero. She doesn't comprehend the function of the Federal Reserve.
She doesn't know what a mortgage-backed security is.
She has no concept of exchanging labor for capital. She has a toddler's mental toolkit.
But, and this is the vital psychological insight, she does not wander around her house in a state of existential confusion.
Right. She possesses a crystal clear, 100% confident narrative of exactly how the universe operates.
Yeah. When her father puts on his coat and leaves for work in the morning, she doesn't think, oh, my provider must go interface with the capitalist system to generate revenue for my future college tuition.
No. She thinks, Dad is not playing with me right now. I want him to play with me. Therefore, Dad is choosing to be mean, and I am sad.
Exactly. She takes the microscopic, incomplete sliver of reality. She actually understands her desire for play.
And she violently stretches it to create a complete, airtight narrative that explains everything happening around her.
And the deeply uncomfortable truth of this deep dive is that every single highly educated adult listening to this conversation does the exact same thing with the global economy.
It is uncomfortable because we take our own microscopic sliver of reality, our specific job, our specific local housing market, the specific news feed, the algorithm feeds us.
Right.
And we extrapolate that to confidently explain the entire global financial apparatus.
We aren't toddlers, but our mental toolkits are still vastly inadequate to process the infinite complexity of billions of moving economic parts.
We are fundamentally blind to the internal mechanical workings of the world.
But the illusion of the narrative makes us believe we have 20/20 vision. The book actually frames this as the alien circling Earth phenomenon.
Oh, the alien analogy, right?
Yeah. Imagine an extraterrestrial observer in a spaceship orbiting our planet, trying to decode human behavior purely by watching our physical actions.
But they have zero access to the invisible emotions and stories inside our heads.
Exactly. They would watch us standing in line for hours to buy a piece of stamped metal or a piece of paper with the president's face on it.
And draw completely absurd conclusions about our biology.
Right, because they see the action, but they are entirely blind to the motive.
And when we look at the economy, we are that alien.
We are. We see the market crash, we see the inflation numbers, but we are completely blind to the millions of invisible motives and the different games people are playing that actually cause those numbers.
So we invent a story based on our own limited biases, and we bet our life savings on that story. Okay, so if we are functionally toddlers trying to decode astrophysics, and we are aliens watching a system we fundamentally misunderstand, how do we survive?
Good question.
How do we stop ourselves from blindly following a confident storyteller, whether it's a Madoff offering fake certainty or a pundit preaching doomsday right off a financial cliff?
Well, survival requires the complete abandonment of the illusion of perfect control.
Okay.
You have to stop pretending you can plot a mathematical trajectory to financial success and accept that you are navigating a dark forest filled with deeply unpredictable humans.
And to survive that forest, you must construct a rigid set of psychological defenses.
Which brings us to the core of the ultimate armor, Chapter 19, the Master Blueprint.
The master blueprint. This synthesizes the actionable lessons from the entire book into a tangible philosophy.
But before we get into the specifics of that checklist, the book warns us about the danger of universal financial advice.
Right. Using the story of a dentist named Clarence Hughes.
Clarence Hughes is the perfect metaphor for the danger of spreadsheets.
Tell the story.
So, Hughes goes to the dentist for a routine visit. The dentist puts him under anesthesia. And without consulting the patient, without discussing alternative treatments, the dentist proceeds to surgically extract every single one of Hughes's teeth.
Just pulls them all out while he's unconscious.
Every single one. And the dentist's defense was fascinating. He genuinely believed that removing all teeth was the universal, technically correct, medically optimal solution to preventing future oral infection.
Which, from a purely clinical, detached, mathematical perspective, the dentist solved the problem of tooth decay forever.
He did. But he completely ignored the psychological and practical reality that the patient might want to chew solid food for the rest of his natural life.
Right. The treatment was mathematically flawless, but practically devastating.
And Housel argues that the financial industry is heavily populated by dentists just like that.
Oh, absolutely.
They know the universal mathematical truths about the market. They know that compound interest works. They know index funds statistically outperform active managers.
But they tried to force a one-size-fits-all mathematical spreadsheet onto a patient they do not intimately know.
Exactly. Financial advisor cannot tell you exactly what to do with your money because they don't know the invisible stories inside your head.
They don't know your specific fears, your unique goals, or what specific level of risk allows you to sleep through the night.
So instead of a rigid mathematical spreadsheet, Housel provides us with an anti-spreadsheet, an ultimate checklist of psychological principles.
Let's dive deep into these because this is the operational core of the analysis.
Let's do it.
Principle 1. Find humility when things go right and forgiveness when things go wrong.
This is the practical application of respecting the invisible forces of luck and risk.
Right. When you make a brilliant investment that doubles your net worth, you must force yourself to acknowledge that a massive percentage of that success was driven by macroeconomic factors completely outside of your control.
Yeah. If your ego convinces you that you are a financial genius, you will eventually take a catastrophic risk that wipes you out.
Conversely, when a well-researched investment fails, you must deploy radical self-forgiveness.
Because risk is simply the other side of the luck coin. Sometimes you make the right mathematical decision and the invisible dice just roll against you.
Principle 2. Less ego, more wealth.
And
this comes with my absolute favorite definition in the entire book.
Oh, I know which one you're going to say.
Savings is simply the gap between your ego and your income. Let's unpack the mechanics of that. What does suppressing your ego actually look like in practice?
Well, it requires a complete rewiring of how you visualize wealth.
Yeah.
Our culture trains us to define wealth by what is visible.
We see the roaring Ferrari, the diamond Rolex, the sprawling mansion.
Yeah.
We say that is wealth.
But true wealth is actually the invisible, stored potential energy of unspent assets.
Wealth is the exhaust you actively choose not to produce.
Right. If you earn $2 million a year, but your fragile ego demands that you spend $2 million a year to visually prove to complete strangers that you are successful living.
You're not actually wealthy.
No. You are just a highly compensated conduit, transferring money from your employer directly to luxury brands.
Wow. Wealth is created exclusively when you suppress your ego today, in order to purchase absolute freedom and options for your future self.
And the concept of enough is the anchor for that ego suppression. If you don't define what enough is, your ego will constantly move the goalposts until you go bankrupt trying to impress people you don't even like.
Which leads seamlessly to principle 3. Manage your money in a way that allows you to sleep well at night.
The spreadsheet will always tell you to maximize your returns by taking on optimal leverage.
Always.
But if a strategy mathematically promises a 10% higher yield, yet requires you to wake up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. to frantically check the Asian markets on your phone.
It is a catastrophic trade.
It is. You are trading your biological well-being for basis points. Peace of mind is the ultimate metric of a successful portfolio.
Principle 4. Use money to gain control over your time. This is framed as the highest possible dividend money can pay.
Absolute independence. The ability to wake up on a Tuesday morning and realize you have the financial autonomy to say, I can do whatever I want today with whoever I want for as long as I want.
No luxury vehicle can ever provide the psychological dividend of owning your own time.
Never.
Principle 5. Be nicer and less flashy.
Yeah.
Because horsepower doesn't buy respect. Humility does. The book calls this the man in the car paradox.
Yeah, this is so true. When you see someone driving a $500,000 sports car, you never look at the driver and think, wow, the person behind the wheel must be an incredibly fascinating, brilliant human being.
You don't even look at the driver. You look at the machine, and you think, wow, if I owned that machine, people would finally think I'm amazing.
Exactly. The paradox is that you purchase the luxury item believing it will buy you the admiration of others, but people just use your item as a mirror to project their own desires onto.
You remain entirely invisible.
Yep.
Principle 6. Worship room for error. Endurance is the absolute secret to compounding. Now let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Okay, go for it.
Isn't room for error just a polite way of saying you should hold way too much cash and constantly lose purchasing power to inflation?
See, that is the spreadsheet speaking again.
Fair.
The spreadsheet says idle cash is a drag on returns, but the psychological reality is that room for error is the reinforced shield that guarantees your survival.
Okay, explain that.
It isn't just about being conservative. It is about building a buffer so massive that when the inevitable multiplayer collision happens and the market drops 40%, you are never mathematically forced to sell your assets to cover your living expenses.
Room for error allows you to absorb the blow and stay in the game long enough for the invisible magic of compounding to actually do its work over decades.
Exactly.
And finally, Principle 7. Avoid extreme ends of financial decisions to minimize future regret.
The foundational truth of human psychology is that we are terrible at predicting who we will become.
We really are. The 22-year-old version of you has radically different priorities than the 45-year-old version of you.
Right, so if you lock yourself into an extreme financial ideology like pledging to work 90 hours a week for decades to become a billionaire, or deciding to live completely off the grid in a van with zero retirement savings,
You are drastically increasing the statistical probability that your future self will deeply resent the rigid decisions made by your past self.
balance is the ultimate hedge against future regret.
Looking at this entire list, it truly is an anti-spreadsheet.
It is.
It is screaming that financial invincibility does not come from having the most complex algorithm. It comes from achieving psychological flexibility.
It is the realization that doing well with money is not a hard science. It is a soft skill.
But to truly understand why we struggle so profoundly to adopt this psychological flexibility, why our ego constantly overrides our logic, and why defining enough feels almost impossible, we have to look at the cultural programming we inherited.
We are not operating in a vacuum.
No, we are not.
Bruh.
To figure out why we spend the way we do, we have to rewind the tape and conduct an autopsy on the matrix of the American consumer.
Which brings us to the postscript of the book.
The postscript.
This section acts as a high-speed sociological time travel through the post-World War II United States economy. And to decode the anxiety of the modern consumer, you have to understand the specific historical environment that built their expectations.
And, as promised, we're going to look at this purely through the objective lens of economic data and cultural shifts. We start in the period from 1945 to 1980.
The source material refers to this as the Great Synchronization.
There is a fascinating observation by venture capitalist Paul Graham regarding the fact that during this era, there were essentially only 3 television stations in America.
Right. Think deeply about the psychological and cultural impact of that limited media diet.
It's crazy to think about now.
It is. Every single night, millions of American families sat down in their living rooms and watched the exact same programs, consumed the exact same advertisements, and received the exact same news as the people living thousands of miles away.
The culture was literally synchronized on a mass scale.
And the economic data mirrored that synchronization. After World War II, America experienced an unprecedented economic boom, but crucially, it boomed together.
Wage disparity was dramatically compressed compared to the modern era. The gap between a factory floor worker and a mid-level corporate manager was relatively narrow.
They lived highly fathomable lives compared to one another. They drove similarly priced domestic cars, they lived in similar-sized suburban homes, and they took the same types of modest vacations.
Because the economic playing field was heavily equalized, people measured their social well-being against a peer group that was largely engaged in the exact same lifestyle.
The baseline for enough was visible, shared, and attainable.
And it was during this exact period of synchronized prosperity that a massive psychological shift occurred. Debt became culturally acceptable.
Right. Prior to the Great Depression, consumer debt was viewed as a dangerous moral failing.
But in the booming 50s and 60s, The proliferation of credit cards and 30-year mortgages became the engine of the middle class, because relative to the rapidly rising incomes of the time, the debt was actually manageable.
The cultural software was updated. A generation internalized the belief that borrowing money from the future to fund a lifestyle today was not only safe, but it was the expected behavior of a successful citizen.
But then the matrix begins to violently fracture. As we move from the 1970s through the 2000s, the underlying economic reality shifts drastically, ushering in the era of lagging expectations.
The overall economic growth of the country continued, but the distribution of that growth became wildly uneven.
Right.
The synchronized middle class began to splinter, and the gap between the top earners and the rest of the population widened into a chasm.
However, and this is the psychological trap that ensnares millions, human expectations move exponentially slower than economic realities.
Meaning, the middle class still fiercely expected to keep up with the top earners because the cultural memory of the 1950s, the idea that everyone succeeds together and deserves the same lifestyle, was permanently hardwired into their brains.
Exactly. And then you inject a massive psychological tailwind into that tension. Look at the cultural impact of Ronald Reagan's 1984 Morning in America political campaign.
From a purely objective behavioral standpoint, that campaign was a masterpiece of psychological engineering.
It really was.
It perfectly captured the deep societal desire to return to the booming, confident years of the post-war era. It boldly declared that the dark days of 1970 stagflation were over, interest rates were falling, and a new era of boundless prosperity had arrived.
It gave consumers the psychological permission to be wildly optimistic and, crucially, to spend aggressively again.
But the prosperity they were spending into was no longer evenly distributed, which leads directly to what Housel calls the big stretch.
The big stretch. This is the moment when a tiny fraction of legitimately wealthy Americans broke away completely from the synchronized culture in terms of their lifestyle.
We are no longer talking about the wealthy family down the street buying a slightly nicer domestic vehicle.
No, we are talking about the proliferation of mega mansions, private aviation, and hyper-exclusive luxury experiences.
And here is where the toxic catalyst enters the system. We co-built this VR analogy earlier, but let's expand it.
Let's do it.
In the 1950s, you were sitting in the exact same movie theater as your neighbor, watching the exact same film.
Right.
But with the explosion of Madison Avenue advertising in the 80s and 90s, and eventually the algorithmic onslaught of the internet, everyone was forced to put on a VR headset.
And that headset doesn't show you the reality of your neighbor anymore. It forces you to compare your own behind-the-scenes, unedited blooper reel of a life with the highly edited, hyperinflated, artificially curated highlight reels of the top 1%.
The extreme lifestyles of the ultra-wealthy became the new, artificially manufactured baseline aspiration for the majority of the population.
It is the keeping up with the Joneses phenomenon injected with algorithmic steroids.
Expectations became completely severed from income reality.
And because the cultural acceptance of debt was already firmly established decades earlier, millions of consumers didn't adjust their expectations downward. They simply borrowed the difference.
They used highly accessible credit to violently stretch their lifestyles, desperately trying to match the artificial reality they saw projected on their screens.
And that brings us full circle to the psychological storm. That is the matrix you are currently living inside.
When you feel an overwhelming, suffocating pressure to purchase luxury items you do not genuinely need, using money you have not yet earned, simply to impress strangers whose opinions you do not even value it.
You are not crazy. You are not broken.
You are flawlessly executing a software program that was systematically installed into your brain by 50 years of complex macroeconomic history and cultural advertising.
But the profound beauty of engaging with a text like The Psychology of Money is that once you can clearly see the underlying code of the matrix, you gain the power to unplug from it.
You can actively choose to stop playing that rigged game.
Which brings our dopaminergic sprint to its epic conclusion. As we wrap up this four-part deep dive, the grand thesis of Morgan Housel's work, the golden thread that connects every historical anecdote, every behavioral quirk, and every crashed market we have explored, is ultimately a message of radical empowerment.
Doing exceptionally well with money has remarkably little to do with your raw intellect, your ability to run complex calculus, or the prestige of the university you attended.
It is a soft skill. It is behavioral mastery. A genius who lacks the ability to control their ego and process their emotions will inevitably engineer their own financial destruction.
But an ordinary person with absolutely no formal financial training can achieve generational wealth if they simply master a handful of vital behavioral defenses.
It truly is the greatest show on earth playing out in real time.
And you, the listener, now hold the master blueprint to navigate that show. You have the ability to recognize the multiplayer collisions happening around you and cleanly define your own specific game.
You can raise your psychological shield and block out the evolutionary biological seduction of the doomsayers.
You can pierce through the reality distortion fields of confident storytellers offering fake certainty.
And you finally understand the historical matrix that programmed your baseline expectations of what enough actually means.
You have the armor. The gap between your ego and your income is entirely yours to control.
But before we officially sign off and leave you to build that wealth, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. It is a question that isn't explicitly answered in the text, but it builds directly on the historical matrix we just unpacked.
If our financial desires and our deep-seated feelings of inadequacy were supercharged by the relatively simple technological shift from 3 television stations to the early internet,
What happens to the psychology of money in the next 10 years?
as we enter an era where artificial intelligence and hyper-targeted algorithms possess the capability to simulate completely personalized, impossibly wealthy realities, perfectly tailored to exploit your exact, deepest psychological insecurities.
Exactly. Will the concept of enough completely disappear, drowned out by infinite algorithmic temptation? Or will mastering the quiet space inside your own mind become the ultimate, truly priceless luxury of the future? Something to think about. Until next time.